Good morning. Welcome to the New York City Council hearing on the Committee on Governmental Operations, State and Federal Legislation, joint with Criminal Justice. At this time, please silence all electronics and do not approach the dais. If you need to testify, please see a Sergeant at Arms. Any other questions or concerns, you may reach a Sergeant at Arms. Thank you for your cooperation. Chairs, you may begin.
So, good morning. I'm Gail Brewer, the Chair of the Committee on Governmental Operations, State and Federal Legislation. I would like to welcome the representatives from the administration, members of the public, and my colleagues who have joined us. We have, so far, Councilmember Narcisse, Morano, and Dinowitz, and then in a few minutes I will be remarks from the awesome Criminal Justice Chair. At today's hearing, we will be conducting oversight of voting on Rikers Island. Voting is our most basic right, the right from which all other rights flow. But on Rikers Island, very few people appear able to exercise that right. Today, we will examine why it is so difficult for people on Rikers Island to vote. Most people held on Rikers are eligible to vote. Over 80% of the nearly 7,000 people currently on Rikers, they're all being held pre-trial and retain the right to vote. Let me be clear. Voters held on Rikers who were serving time for misdemeanor offenses also maintain their voting rights, as well as those who have not been convicted of anything. They're waiting for court. But current law and practices are effectively preventing the vast majority of these individuals from casting their votes. By law, currently, incarcerated voters can only vote by absentee or early mail ballot. They must request a ballot by filling out a physical absentee ballot request form or an early mail ballot request form, or applying through the online portal, which is not easy to find on the island. The physical forms must be delivered either through the postal system or by the Department of Corrections staff. Then, once the applications are approved, the ballots must then be delivered to Rikers Island, either through the mail or picked up by DOC staff. Corrections staff only makes one trip to the Board of Elections per week, and mail at Rikers Island is slow, making this a tedious process. Voting using early or mail ballots requires the voter to place the completed ballot in an envelope, seal a ballot affirmation envelope, and sign it. Any error on the ballot envelope will result in the BOE rejecting the ballot. If a ballot is rejected, the Board of Elections is required to send a notice about the errors and give the voter an opportunity to cure any defects if they are curable. And you'll hear more about this with a wonderful bill that my colleague has. These notices are sent to either the person's address of registration or the address of the application, which, as you can imagine, may not be the place where the voter is currently incarcerated. If the defect is not curable, the Elections Board is required to inform the voter about alternate ways to vote, such as filing an affidavit ballot at a local polling place, that's not possible, or obtaining a new absentee or early mail ballot. However, no surprise to you, neither of these options are realistically available to incarcerated voters. In the June 2024 primary, of 155 early and absentee ballots that were either delivered to voters on Rikers, only 72 were returned and counted, and that's after a lot of work by volunteers. While the Board of Elections is responsible for conducting voter registration and processing requests for early mail and absentee ballots for voters on Rikers Island, they cannot do it without the cooperation of the Board of Correction. BOC, in turn, relies heavily on outside volunteers to conduct voter registration and help individuals fill out ballots and ballot request forms. But since Correction decides which facilities volunteers can visit and the limited number of visits volunteers can make, it is not clear how often a given unit is visited, and there are many units and houses on Rikers Island. While it seems like the Board of Elections and the Department of Correction have been making an effort to work together to make the process more efficient, and they have been, I want to give credit where credit's due, clearly more needs to be done to ensure that every eligible voter on Rikers has the opportunity to register to vote, to get an absentee ballot if they want one, and to ensure their vote is actually counted. And I have to say, for those of us who've been working on this for a while, we feel the only way to do this is to have polling places. In addition to doing oversight, we will also be hearing two pieces of legislation. First, we will hear Intro 786, sponsored by Chair Brooks Powers, which would amend the procedures for and reporting on curing ballots, as I indicated earlier, for voters in correction custody. We will also be hearing Intro number 541, sponsored by Public Advocate Damani Williams, which would require reporting on voting in jails. I would like to thank the following council staff for their work on this hearing. From the Government Operations Committee, Jahari Frazier, Erica Cohen, and Sigma Hamid. And for my staff, I want to thank the very special Cynthia Hornig and everyone who made this hearing run smoothly. And now, I don't think anybody else has joined us. I would like to turn it over to the indomitable Chair Brooks Powers to give her opening statement.
Thank you so much, and good morning. I'm Councilmember Selvina Brooks Powers, Chair of the Committee on Criminal Justice. I want to thank Chair Brewer for co-chairing today's joint oversight hearing on voting in Rikers, and thank everyone for being here. I'm really excited about today's conversation. I've been talking to Chair Brewer about this for some time now. The right to vote is fundamental, and in New York, individuals who are detained pre-trial or serving time for misdemeanor offenses remain eligible to vote. At Rikers Island, the vast majority of individuals are eligible to participate in our elections. Yet, significant barriers continue to prevent many from exercising that right. Today's hearing will examine those barriers, including challenges related to voter registration, curing ballots, access to information, ballot delivery and return, and the coordination between the Department of Correction and Board of Elections. We will hear from the Department of Correction, the Board of Elections, advocates, and the public about how the current system is working in practice, where it is falling short, and what steps can be taken to ensure that eligible voters in custody are able to participate in our democracy. We will also explore how other jurisdictions have approached voting in jails and what lessons may be applied here in New York City. We are also considering two pieces of legislation, as it's been mentioned. Introduction 786, sponsored by myself, would require the Department of Correction to work with the Board of Elections to establish procedures for curing ballots and to report on outcomes related to ballot defects and rejections. Intro number 797, sponsored by the Public Advocate, would require annual reporting on voter registration and voting activities in city jails. Together, these bills aim to improve transparency and ensure that eligible voters in custody are not disenfranchised due to administrative barriers. Ensuring access to the ballot for eligible voters in our custody is not only a legal obligation, but also a matter of fairness and integrity in our democratic process. As a former advisor of the NAACP Jamaica Youth Branch, where I supported efforts to expand civic engagement and voter access, including for justice-impacted communities, I know how critical this work is. I look forward to a productive discussion on how we can strengthen access to voting, improve coordination across agencies, and ensure that every eligible New Yorker has the opportunity to make their voice heard. I would like to thank my staff and committee staff for their hard work. Chad Benjamin, policy analyst, Jeremy Whiteman, senior counsel to the committee, Casey Leisky, financial analyst, Julian Martin, my deputy chief of staff, Kiara Powell, my Communications Director, and Renee Taylor, my Chief of Staff. I thank everyone again who is joining us today and look forward to a thoughtful and constructive discussion on voting on Rikers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I now turn it over to the public advocate to talk about his bill or anything else he would like to discuss.
Thank you so much. Maybe the next. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Morning, as was mentioned, my name is Jamani Williams. I'm the public advocate for the City of New York. I'd like to thank Chairs Brewer and Brooks Powers and the members of the committees for holding this important hearing. There are close to 7,000 people who are detained in Rikers Island, most of whom, as was mentioned, are actually eligible to vote. Though people who have been convicted of a felony cannot vote while incarcerated, most people on Rikers are being detained pre-trial or serving time for misdemeanors and therefore are eligible to cast a ballot. Despite this, unfortunately, only a fraction of the incarcerated population in the jails vote. As the majority of the Rikers population is black and brown, it is hard not to hear the echoes of Jim Crow and this effective disenfranchisement of thousands of potential voters. And even if it's not fully Jim Crow, if you have the right and you can't exercise it, it's the same thing. The people detained on Rikers rely on volunteers who come into the jails to assist people in registering to vote and requesting absentee ballots. Even with assistance, registering to vote while incarcerated presents unique challenges. In what district does a person who has been locked up for months register? What address should they use? A person might lose their apartment as a result of being detained, for example, and the high turnover rate of the jail population often means that a person misses deadlines ahead of Election Day. Additionally, with the no access to the internet and limited social interaction with people who are not in their housing unit, people are generally deprived of information while incarcerated, which makes it more difficult to be engaged in elections. Distrust with the government may also deter people from voting. Though volunteers can help people on Rikers register to vote, it is still the responsibility of the BOE and DOC to deliver the absentee ballots to the jail population and to count those completed ballots. These seem straightforward, but often isn't. Advocates report that the BOE routinely rejects completed registration forms, absentee ballots, and completed ballots from eligible incarcerated New Yorkers. In the outside world, a person whose ballot was rejected, as you heard, would be notified and they would have the opportunity to address any issues. The same is often not true as those in Rikers Island. In practice, some of those who requested a ballot receive it, and only some of those ballots are counted, leaving only a small percentage of the eligible population actually able to vote. This would not be acceptable in the outside world, and we should not accept it inside Rikers either. New York City can and should be more. As I mentioned, I'm glad that we are doing some, but there is a lot more that needs to be done. There are other municipalities like Ulster County that send bipartisan election commissioners, election officials in person along with trained volunteers to their local jail to process registration forms, ballot applications, and ballots themselves. DOC can remove barriers to these voter registration volunteers to enter the facilities by not making them wait hours to enter the jail or overly restricting what voter education materials they can bring in. What would truly address this lack of access is hosting a polling place in Rikers Island itself, where those detained there can vote in person without worrying about requesting an absentee ballot or having it rejected. Today, we are hearing two pieces of legislation that will give us a better scope of the voting landscape inside Rikers Island. My bill, Intro 797, will require the Department of Correction to report annually on voter registration inside city jails, including the number of completed voter registration forms, disaggregated by facility and demographic information, as well as the number of absentee ballots distributed to incarcerated people. Intro 786, introduced by Chair Brooks Powers, and of which I am also a sponsor, would require the DOC Commissioner to collaborate with the BOE to create procedures for curing ballots for voters on Rikers, as well as assist people in their custody with obtaining new ballots as necessary. Additionally, it would require DOC to report on statistics over the last 5 years regarding curing ballots for voters in their custody, including how many ballots were not counted. Civil rights, including voting rights, are not optional. Just because a person is incarcerated does not mean they do not have a vested interest in their communities, including who represents them in government. Voting is one of a number of pro-social behaviors associated with reduced recidivism. So ensuring that our incarcerated people can exercise their constitutional rights to vote is a matter of public safety. I look forward to working with the Council and the administration to ensure that everyone who is eligible is able to vote. We should be making sure that people are as connected as possible civically. We seem to sometimes do the opposite in terms of housing employment, and of course, voting. They have a voice that is going to be particularly impact. And lastly, I'll say there is a lot of names being thrown around. I called folks at Rikers detained individuals and maybe incarcerated individuals. Some people, unfortunately, still use the word inmates. What I'd like to do is to talk about New Yorkers who have the right to vote, and that right to vote is they're not able to exercise it. And what will we do with any group of New Yorkers who are in that situation? I think we know the answer. So let's apply that here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'd like to turn it over to Committee Counsel Jahari Frazier to administer the oath. And I want to thank the Department of Correction for being here. The Board of Elections is on Zoom.
Good morning. We will now hear testimony from the administration. Before we begin, I will administer the affirmation. Panelists, please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you. You may begin when ready.
I just want to be sure that the Board of Elections said yes. Did you say yes?
I thought the oath was being administered to Department of Corrections at this time, but yes, of course.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
You're
Ryan.
welcome.
Good morning. Chair Brooks Powers and Chair Brewer and the members of the Committees on Criminal Justice and Government Operations, State and Federal Legislation. My name is Nell Colon, and I serve as the Deputy Commissioner of Programs and Community Partnerships for the New York City Department of Correction. I'm joined today by Valerie Graysock, an Assistant Commissioner in the Division of Programs and Community Partnerships, who oversees the department's civic engagement efforts and works closely with our partners in this area. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss our civic engagement work and our continued commitment to ensuring that all eligible individuals, or as Public Advocate Williams mentioned, New Yorkers, who are in our care are able to exercise their right to vote. We believe deeply that access to the democratic process is an important part of civic participation, and that eligible voters should be able to cast a ballot regardless of their circumstances, and that every vote should be able to count. The department's role is to help make that access possible while respecting the legal framework that governs elections and the independent role of the Board of Elections. The department's work in this area is focused on facilitation. State election law governs most aspects of the voting process, and the board maintains primary responsibility for election administration. Within that framework, the Department of Correction works to ensure that people who are in our care, who are eligible to vote, have access to information, registration opportunities, and the tools needed to request and submit absentee ballots. We do this through a combination of education and engagement, access to forms, and operational support. Education is a key part of our approach. The department provides nonpartisan voter education materials developed in partnership with the New York City Campaign Finance Board. And DOC staff, as well as external partners, deliver civic engagement programming year-round to individuals to help understand eligibility rules, election timelines, and how to access voting resources. Registration drives are conducted with external partners up to 16 times per year to assist individuals in understanding and completing necessary forms. This work is intended to ensure that people in our jails have the same basic information about the voting process that they would have access to in the community. Voter registration forms and absentee ballot applications are available through multiple avenues, including requests to staff, distribution during voter registration drives, and through tablets assigned to people in our care. Individuals may complete these materials independently and submit them directly to the board, or they may request assistance from a DOC program staff, a partnering agency, or a volunteer. When individuals choose to submit materials through the department, program staff coordinate the collection and hand delivery of voter registration forms, absentee ballot applications, and completed ballots to the board to ensure timely processing. At the same time, we are careful to preserve the independence and the privacy of the voting process. The department does not influence voting decisions, does not monitor ballot choices, and does not interfere when individuals choose to handle their voting process independently. Partnerships are central to making this work effective. We are proud of our longstanding collaboration with the Legal Aid Society and the broader Voting on Rikers Working Group, which for several years has brought together government and nonprofit partners to support voter education and registration efforts. We also partner closely with the New York City Campaign Finance Board to develop educational materials and provide staff training. More recently, the department entered into a partnership with Empower Assist Care Network, affectionately known as the EAC Network, to further expand voter education and registration outreach across facilities. Internally, we also work with Health and Hospitals or Correctional Health Services, their reentry team, who help support individuals who request assistance with forms as part of a broader reentry planning effort. These partnerships are critical because they help us ensure this work is robust, it is credible, and grounded in best practices, while also reinforcing that civic engagement work in correctional settings benefits from collaboration across agencies and with community-based organizations. With respect to the proposed legislation before Council, the department shares the goal of supporting voting access and transparency. At the same time, we must be mindful of the operational realities of our role and the legal structure that governs elections. Regarding Intro 786, which would require the department to facilitate ballot curing, the Department of Correction has concerns about the feasibility of implementing these requirements given our limited role in the election process. Under state law, the ballot curing process is administered directly by the Board of Elections, which communicates directly with voters using their contact information provided by the voter. The bill would appear to involve the Department of Corrections in the administration of elections, something the department is not set up to do. The department does not receive notifications of ballot deficiencies and does not have access to the systems that would allow us to identify which ballots require curing. There are also operational challenges related to the fluid nature of the jail population. Individuals may enter and leave custody with little notice, and the department does not always have reliable forwarding contact information. Creating a parallel process that depends on the DOC receiving and redistributing cure notices would impose substantial operational difficulties. The department remains committed to working with partners to support lawful and workable approaches to expanding access to voting and ensuring that all votes can be counted. Regarding Intro 797, which would require annual reporting on voter registration and voting activity, DOC already produces regular reports related to agency-based voter registration and civic engagement activities and is committed to transparency in this area. We look forward to continuing to work with the Council to ensure any additional reporting requirements are aligned with the data the department is available or is able to reliably collect within the scope of our facilitative role. By supporting civic engagement and voting access for eligible people who are in our care, we are supporting dignity and connection to community. That is a hallmark of putting people first. We look forward to continuing to work with our partners, including the Council, to strengthen these efforts while respecting the legal and operational boundaries of our role. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and we are happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. First, we're going to hear from the Board of Elections on Zoom.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, very good. Good morning, Chair Brooks Powers, Chair Brewer, and the members of the committees. My name is Michael Ryan, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Board of Elections in the City of New York. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding voting access for eligible incarcerated individuals in New York City jails. I would like to emphasize the strong and longstanding partnership collectively forged between the Board and the Council. The Board greatly values this partnership and looks forward to continued collaboration with the New York City Department of Corrections and various community partners. The Board remains committed to ensuring that all eligible voters, including those in custody, have meaningful access to the voter franchise and are able to participate in the democratic process in full compliance with New York State election law. The Board shares the goals of expanding access to voting while maintaining the integrity, security, and lawful administration of elections. Within the constitutional and statutory framework, it is the board's responsibility to administer elections in the city of New York. The Department of Correction plays a critical role in facilitating access and communication for individuals eligible to vote and temporarily in custody within its facilities. Voting in New York State is an individual right based on one's residence and voter registration, not their place of temporary confinement. As a result, individuals detained on Rikers Island remain registered in their home election districts and must vote accordingly. This is not merely a convenient interpretation, it is a critical safeguard to the integrity of elections, both for the individual voter and the elections process generally. It ensures that individuals only cast votes in elections and districts in which they are registered based on the address provided by the voter as their residence. This information is provided under the legal umbrella of an affidavit containing, in part, the following language. Affidavit. I swear or affirm that the above information is true. I understand that if it is not true, I can be convicted and fined up to $5,000 and or jailed for up to 4 years. This affidavit is completed by the voter and affirmed with their signature. The method for voting provided for eligible individuals in custody is absentee voting, the same method used by all other voters who are unable to vote in person on election day or during early voting. The board works in close coordination with the Department of Correction to support these efforts. DOC facilities, access to absentee ballot application, and the collection of completed materials, while the board is responsible for processing all applications, issuing ballots, and post-election ballot canvassing in accordance with state law. This partnership is essential to ensuring that eligible voters in custody have fair and meaningful access to the ballot. The board has engaged in ongoing collaboration with stakeholders, including the Legal Aid Society and the broader Voting in Jails Coalition, to improve awareness, coordination, and access to voting resources. These efforts have strengthened the program and reflect a shared commitment across agencies and partners. To provide context on the current process, during the 2025 general election, 621 ballots were issued to incarcerated voters citywide. 335 ballots were received and counted. 247 ballots were issued but not returned. 23 ballots were returned as undeliverable. 14 ballots were deemed to be invalid but curable. 1 ballot was invalid and not curable, and 1 ballot was received past the legal deadline. For the 14 curable ballots, cure notices were issued in accordance with state law. These ballots represent a relatively small percentage of those issued. However, the board works diligently to ensure that access to the voter franchise is provided to all voters. The cure process is administered directly by the board using the contact information provided by the voter. And there are important legal and operational constraints that shape this work. The board is required to operate strictly within New York State election law, which governs voter eligibility, ballot access, and election procedures. Certain proposals, including those related to polling locations, ballot curing process, or absentee voting requirements, are limited by New York State law and would require legislative action at the state level. The board is not permitted to depart from statutory authority or substitute its independent judgment for the law. Elections do not occur in a vacuum. There are 57 additional counties outside the city of New York, and the New York State election law, combined with the rules and regulations promulgated by the New York State Board of Elections, provides the framework ensuring county-to-county consistency and preserves the overall integrity of the elections process. It is essential that such framework be maintained, as each voter has an individual right to expect that the election process will not vary based upon the particular county in which an election occurs. The board has consistently maintained that the only legally permissible manner to provide access to the voter franchise for those in custody is the absentee ballot process. The board has communicated this legal position to Vote NYC Jails Coalition and the Legal Aid Society of its position in various letters, most recently on April 16th, 2024. I have attached the copies of the communications for the committee's reference. As the absentee ballot process remains the only legally permissible method to provide access to the voter franchise for those in custody, any evaluations or suggestions regarding operational considerations associated with and related to administering traditional poll sites within a complex correctional setting are moot. I have attached 19 pages of canvassing guidance for county boards published and promulgated by the New York State Board of Elections that provides the framework in which we must conduct elections. Another challenge is that the absentee ballot applications expire at the end of each calendar year under state law, requiring voters to reapply for subsequent elections. While the board recognizes that this can create hurdles, particularly in a custodial setting, it does not have the authority to modify same. Despite these constraints, the board remains committed to working collaboratively with the Department of Corrections, the City Council, and advocacy partners to strengthen the absentee voting process and improve access wherever feasible within the law. Continued coordination, clear communication, and shared understanding of roles are essential to ensuring both access and integrity of our elections. In closing, the board appreciates the council's attention to this issue and looks forward to continued partnership in support of eligible voters in custody and is grateful for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. We've been joined by Councilmember Caban. I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we will turn it over to my colleague. So just starting with the Department of Correction, no S. I keep telling people, no S on correction. I can tell how long you have been here by whether or not you put an S on it. So my question is, my understanding is on a regular basis, I don't know what that means, there are discussions between the two agencies as well as the vote in NYC jails, twice a month maybe? So could you start at correction, just talking about how often these votes, these phone calls take place, what gets discussed? Is it a working group that works? Are there any ideas that come out of it that could be implemented? How could we improve the process as a result of these discussions? You get the idea. We want to understand how this cooperation works and is it fruitful? Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So just to begin, the Voting on Rikers Working Group does convene on a monthly basis. That's 12 times a year. And really part of this partnership is our connection to legal aid and some volunteers that are also a part of this working group who come boots to ground to Department of Correction facilities 16 times a year to support registration efforts. On these calls, and I can even say recently, there are suggestions that we do take heed to. For example, our curriculum that was created in collaboration with the Campaign Finance Board. Recently, we received feedback on updates and edits that should go into that curriculum so that when we're providing education to people who are in our care, that it is at the most accurate and up-to-date information that we could possibly be giving. And so we are grateful and thankful to our partners on the working group who do provide these suggestions. And I would just highlight, Assistant Commissioner Valerie Graysock joins these on a monthly basis. And so if you want to speak a little bit more to your experience.
Good morning. Thank you for that question. Yes, those monthly conversations have been very fruitful, and we've received feedback on the kinds of resources we can offer to individuals in our care, the curriculum, which we recently updated and that we collaborated on initially on development, and that we just recently updated. Also, the voter registration drives themselves, how we're communicating to people in custody about the upcoming drives, and our overall engagement efforts. We've made significant improvements, specifically based on the feedback from those conversations.
And when you get this curriculum or ideas, how do you communicate it to those who are detained? In other words, it's good to have it on your computer, but how do you get it out so people know? It's hard enough to know what is a voting process when you are not at Rikers, and it's even more challenging. So how do you communicate it?
Thank you. There's a few methods of communication. Just to start with technology, because you mentioned computers, it is available on our tablets. So just to begin there, for those who have a tablet, they do have access to this material on the tablet. But when it comes where I think the biggest driver of this information being provided to people is through person engagement, like in-person, person-to-person conversations. So mentioning or going back to those 16 voter registration drives that are critical, that canvass multiple facilities, although one facility is specifically targeted each event. There is person-to-person interaction that does go into the education materials and guides people on various aspects of voting. And then we have also trained all of our counseling team members. And so that is the critical component of how we do this as a departmental agency, is that we ensure on a quarterly basis our counseling services unit facilitates and it uses these materials to ensure that people are aware of the latest trends with voting, but also are just generally aware of access to vote and how to vote in a nonpartisan way.
Now, I believe there are very few volunteers who come on a regular basis, like 3 or 4. And so my question is, are they able to go to all the different units? Do they only get to go to one unit? How do they get around? It's not like you're in, one facility upstate. Not the prisons, but the jails and the counties might just be one. We have many more. So how does one travel from one unit to the other? How do you decide where they go? Because they do complain that they don't get to go to as many units as they would like.
Thank you for that question. So for each of the voter registration drives, they do go to specifically one facility. Those facilities do rotate during every single drive, so it's not like they're going to the same facility every single month or every single voter registration drive. And when they are in that facility, they are only able to see a subset of housing units. They typically are not able to go to all housing units within that site. And I think to recognize and mitigate that, because we realize that's a real challenge, if they're only going to a subset of housing units, then how do we get this information to everyone? Which is where, for our counseling services staff, we try to have them go to the large majority of all housing units, if not all housing units, on that quarterly basis to provide that information. And I think even in this notion of recognizing there still might be a gap, in 2026, we began to engage with the EAC network, who is going to be coming in twice a week and supporting the further rotation of housing units that may not have been touched on those voter registration drives, so that we have continuing engagement, continuing access in a person-to-person conversation for registration forms, and then continuing education.
Okay, and you'll track that. Having a new commissioner helps, a fabulous new commissioner. So how do you track? I know what the volunteers are doing, but how do you track what your program staff is doing to know that they're actually doing this, because they have other jobs too?
Yes, so we do have a programs data tracker. That data tracker is where we do enter in for the counseling services unit all of their programming efforts, and so that would be under our civic engagement curriculum that we do track that information when they do facilitate that. And then as for our partnership that we have recently started with EAC Network, that will also be tracked using our data tracking methods, so that we know who we engaged with. And just broadly speaking, when we are doing our voter registration drives, or we're doing any collecting of voter registration forms or absentee ballot request forms, we do also track who we engaged with and who we gave forms to or received forms back.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ryan, my question is, according to the League of Women Voters, no one from the Board of Elections has attended, and they go. The League of Women Voters goes. Any of those meetings that I just described, those monthly meetings? since October 25. A, is that true? And if so, why did the Board of Elections stop attending?
Perhaps, but starting in October 25, we were preparing for a gubernatorial election. I do know this, our staff and our point person is in regular contact with the Department of Corrections. So while we might not be attending a formal meeting from time to time, depending on the needs of attending to elections, we are in regular communication with the staff that's doing this work with the Department of Corrections.
Okay. But in the future, would you assign somebody to participate in these monthly meetings?
Yes, as staff is available.
But you have plenty of staff, sir. I'm just saying, I
Well,
hope, I
will
think it
tell
would
you,
be,
in the lead up to elections,
Okay.
the elections is an all hands on deck
All right.
process, and sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes administrative meetings have to be set aside for the purposes of conducting an election. But certainly, we've attended many of them, and
Okay.
we're committed to the process.
all right, thank you very much. Can you help me again? Just, you talked about the election last year, and 621 ballots, 335 received, et cetera. In the very end, maybe some were cured, the 14. How many people out of the 621 who are housed at Rikers actually were able to vote? Maybe I missed it.
335.
So they were actually able to vote out of the 621 of those?
Right.
Okay.
Received and counted, yes.
Okay. So my question is, that's obviously, 621 is not a lot, 335, if you're talking, I don't know, say, 5,000 people, if you're giving the benefit of the doubt to the 20% or so who are not able to vote on Rikers. What do you suggest? I know you don't like the polling place. I like the polling place. I'm going to talk about it. But what else do you suggest we can do to up the number when thousands are eligible? I understand all the problems. People leave, they go upstate, they don't know what, they don't know the process. But do you have some suggestions in addition to what happens now as to how we can get these numbers up?
So just for a clarification, as a lawyer, I like the law, and we believe that we're following the law. With respect to upping the numbers, just to give you some context, while there was only a 54% return rate on the absentee ballots, for example, in 2025, in the general population, there was only a 73% return rate for absentee ballots. So it's off the mark, but a lot of people don't return their ballots, whether they're held in custody or whether they're not. With respect to that, the distribution process on Rikers Island, I would defer to the Department of Corrections to help us with information that identifies these voters, and we will process anything that we receive. When you consider that number 5,000, while it's a lot, we received for the general election last year, including the Department of Corrections, over 235,000 absentee ballot applications, and all were processed without issue. So an additional 3,000 to 5,000 number is not going to be something that upsets the process from the Board of Elections side.
No, we want more people to vote for sure, but do you send from the Board of Elections anybody to register or pre-register voters at Rikers?
No, the city charter, we rely on the requirements of the city charter, which mandates the Department of Correction to do that.
All right, so it's either volunteers or people from the Department of Correction, no S, right? I'm just reminding
Yes,
everybody, no S.
I work for the city and the state. The state has the S.
I know,
Sometimes
so
I
I'm
make
just
a
making
mistake.
sure there's no S on it. I'm just neurotic about that. My final question is, I'm still focused on the polling place. So you have Cook County, apparently, Washington, D.C., apparently Colorado. I assume they have some technology that goes with the polling place because they have the same problem. Cook County's pretty big. They have people from different parts, south side, north side, whatever, Chicago. They apparently, I don't know for sure because I haven't checked, have the opportunity to have people at a polling place. So my question is, do you think, maybe not today, because we all want to be able to vote in different locations. I know that's a goal. But do you think there is the technology out there to be able to try to disengage, would be the word, so that people could know which AD they're in? Is there some technology out there that is fairly, is close to making that possible?
So just for starters, and I have to reiterate, New York State Election Law 8-400 sets out the process for absentee voting as the substitute for individuals for whatever reason who cannot
Correct.
get
Yep.
to the poll site.
Yep.
So we have to follow that law right now as it sits, and that is the clear guidance that we have received from the State Board of Elections.
Okay.
But Councilmember Brewer, one of the other challenges is we have to set the ballots up by election district and assembly district. So let's assume you are successful in persuading your fellow legislators in the state to make an amendment to the election law that allows for that to occur for people who are incarcerated. When you have a fluid population, like the population that's on Rikers Island, that is going to be a challenge to make sure that we have, the right ballots at the location for, for people, to be available for people to vote on. One that we quite frankly have not explored, but I can give you the assurances that if the law provides us with a directive, we will operationally work on that directive and make the changes necessary to accomplish a legal goal.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm like a dog with a bone. You know that. I turn it over to my colleague.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both agencies for their testimony. I just want to reiterate to the Department of Corrections in particular that we request all testimony to be submitted no less than 24 hours in advance. This is the second time I'm publicly requesting that, and would really appreciate your partnership on that. So going into logistics of the voting process, and this is going to be for the Department of Correction. It is our understanding that there is only a single individual responsible for ensuring that all the voter registration forms, absentee and early mail ballot request forms, and absentee ballots are delivered to the Board of Elections. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. So in history, because I'm saying this because in 2026 the landscape is changing, but historically, yes, we have had a single person identified, but I do just want to say that while this single person, their role and responsibility is around civic engagement, they don't work in a vacuum, they work on a team. And so there is a team around them that includes an executive director, a deputy director, and they also work in partnership with our counseling services team that can be upwards of 60 staff at any given time. So I do want to say that while it's one person that is the primary responsibility and their job duty and job function, there is a team that surrounds them. And I would say then for the landscape changing in 2026, in recognizing having a single person responsible for some of this could be a challenge. And while not working in a vacuum and on a team, that there might still need to be more support. That really is where we went into like a contractual partnership with a partnering agency, because we recognize that there needs to be more people that are supporting the pickup and delivery of forms and having this be a sole responsibility or duty.
Thank you for that. And how often does that main person deliver materials to the Board of Elections?
Thank you for that question. I believe, quite frankly, that it depends, but that we have set up regular distribution or collection to the Board of Elections, and I would just ask for my colleague, Valerie Graysock, to give the definitive answer.
Yes, we have a close partnership with the BOE to deliver voter registration forms, for example, after a voter registration drive. During the election, once we receive completed ballots, we deliver them to the BOE. So that process is ongoing.
Okay, and so you would say during the election season, it is done a bit more often?
Yes.
Okay. Have they received any training from the Board of Elections, the Campaign Finance Board, or the Civic Engagement Commission on best practices for filling out voter registration forms, absentee or early mail ballot requests, or absentee ballots?
Yes, and I'm also going to hand it over to my partner, Valerie Graysock, to describe that in more detail.
Yes, we have a strong partnership with the New York Campaign Finance Board, and they have provided training to our counseling staff and to our counseling supervisors. They just recently trained and provided updated training to the supervisors on best practices.
How does the department learn about upcoming elections?
We work very closely with the BOE and with our partners to make sure that we have all the up-to-date information, and that information is made available to our staff as well as to the people in our care.
Is someone responsible for keeping track on when the elections occur, and is it done through the collaboration with the Board of Elections? Are you depending primarily on BOE?
Yes, we work very closely with the BOE and with our partners. And part of the benefit of having these monthly calls is that we're able to always stay in communication and receive updates about any upcoming elections.
And I would just emphasize, I think, the having the person with the sole responsibility of civic engagement, like this is part of their role and duty, is to make sure that we're on top of this as an agency.
Thank you for that. And how do you handle registering voters for special elections?
Like the process in general?
Yeah, because
Okay,
those come up. I was elected in a special election, so I'm curious how that's handled. It happens so quickly.
Do you want to dive into the details for special election?
Yeah, so for any individual in custody who requested a ballot, the BOE will provide us with a ballot for that individual if there were to be a special election. And then we will follow up directly with that person to help them to complete it.
And how do you ensure the correct voters apply and receive ballots for special elections that occur in districts that they vote within?
So on the absentee ballot request form, they put their address, and it's my understanding that's the address that the BOE would use to determine if that person should receive a ballot for the special election.
So walk me through this a little bit. So I'll use myself as the case in point. So 31st Council District covers parts of Southeast Queens. I have a constituent that is housed on Rikers, and it's noticed. How is the Department of Correction making that connection to that eligible voter to notify them that there's a special election happening?
I think just to emphasize, so people, part of our regular ongoing process is that people are completing both the voter registration forms and are also completing, as mentioned, on an annual basis, or as applicable on an annual basis, the absentee ballot form request. So when that information or that address is then highlighted and notified to the Board of Elections, that's when we would become aware that there is a person that would be in that district. But then not to negate, I think there are absolutely times where we get information on a special election, and then we are speaking to people about that through our education practices. So if we're doing our educational counseling sessions or programming sessions using our curriculum, we do speak about special elections, and then we can highlight or emphasize if there is a special election that is currently occurring.
But that's more general, right? So like if there's an actual election underway, because the runway is so short, like my election was like February 19th and it was noticed in January. So that's a quick turnaround for a place like Rikers that has layers to it. So how is there a system in place to make sure that they're being notified in a timely manner?
It would be upon receipt of us being aware that someone would be in that district.
So you would depend on the BOE to notify you?
On the Board of Election, yes, primarily, to notify us that somebody would be in that district, and that is under the assumption that they would have had a absentee ballot form request having been submitted from Rikers Island. So I think, to your point, it does get a bit tricky if there's somebody in our custody who did not submit an absentee ballot form request while they were in our custody, that was then submitted to the Board of Elections, if that's what we're trying to get to.
Can I just have one question? Technology. You come in, I know we all know, lots of people come into Rikers, we know them personally. Is there some way in 2026 their address could be coordinated with the AD and the ED, literally, so that if there is an election, you would tell them? Is that something that, believe me, that's possible? Is that something we could consider doing?
We will absolutely look into it, and I do think that
AI in 2
technology.
seconds.
Yep, technology is critical.
Thank you.
No, thank you for that. And in line with Chair Brewer, how are you all tracking individuals that have filled out the registration form or early mail or absentee ballot request forms? And do you feel the tracking is robust enough to ensure delivery to a person who has been moved from, for example, a different unit or facility?
Yes, so what we know is who we have distributed voter registration forms to and who has given them back to us, and then therefore whom we have delivered them to the Board of Elections. So we are aware if we do receive a form from a person, a specific person that is like an absentee ballot request form, and therefore if we then received the absentee ballot to give to them, we would be aware of who that person was for us to be able to then locate them and provide them with their absentee ballot form.
Now, what steps do you take when a person requested an early mail or absentee ballot while in custody, but the ballot is distributed after the person has been released from custody?
So it is our practice that if we receive an absentee ballot and somebody has been released, that we would mail that to the person.
Okay. Pivoting to coordinating with volunteers, the Vote in NYC Jails Coalition comes to Rikers Island about twice a month to register voters and help incarcerated individuals fill out their absentee ballots. Volunteers have told us that they're only allowed to register voters in a facility selected by DOC officials. How do you decide which facility volunteers are allowed to register voters in? And I have a couple more questions right now. We'll just pause there.
Yeah, so to our best extent, we rotate each of our facilities to make sure that there is equal access. So that would be on rotation, and at times there have been days where we are planning for a voter registration drive in a jail and end up pivoting to a different facility or site.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, I've heard that at times the registration is happening on one facility at a time as a rotation, which to me is concerning because that means that there are several other facilities not getting the same access. And what is the rationale from DOC not allowing the registration to take place at each of the facilities? And I know often DOC likes to limit the amount of visitors just in terms of this is, these folks' residents, but they're different facilities. So it's not like if 5 people are here and 5 people are there, like it's an overlap. So what is the rationale that 2 facilities, 3 facilities, all facilities can conduct the registration process at the same time on the same schedule?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the rationale is to try to limit the other facilities, but it is due to efficiency of resources, quite frankly. And so when we're bringing in volunteers who are not, at times, some people do come regularly every single drive, and then we do have folks that this is their first time coming into Rikers, and when we're clearing them to come into our facility, we do have a dedicated team that does escort them into the facility, bring them to the dedicated areas, and so that can be resource intensive to be doing that at multiple sites at the exact same time. Not to say impossible, just to say resource intensive. And so to take heed to this suggestion, I do think it's something we can look into.
I just want to say that the Lycée Albert Camus from France was visiting with us today. Merci beaucoup, alors. Okay, thank you.
Has the Vote in New York City Jails Coalition been allowed in every facility in Rikers?
Let us confirm. Valerie, can you share?
Okay.
Yes, they've been going to all the facilities throughout the year.
So they've been to everyone? They've been to each one?
They've been to all the facilities throughout the year.
Thank you. What's the frequency? So how often are the volunteers allowed in each of the units at Rikers?
So we do 16 drives a year. And again, I think that that's where we have even acknowledged that 16 times a year rotating to one facility, which might mean that a facility gets a touch point twice a year if we're rotating, that there could be more, which is why we have really intentionally wanted to dedicate resources to a twice a week model where we have a partnering agency coming in 2 times a week. But as it pertains to the working group and to volunteers, it is 16 times a year, which for broadly speaking, that's like once a month, maybe twice a month during specific months.
So before each election, has every unit in every facility been visited at least once?
I think we can say pretty confidently that every unit has been visited by a DOC staff member, specifically a counseling services unit member, because of the quarterly educational drives that we do try to partner around the times of election cycles as well, when they're delivering that material. And so they would have received information on how to access registration forms and absentee ballot forms through that educational process. But as it pertains to ensuring that the volunteers and advocates can touch every single housing unit, by November or by June, I think it would be hard for us to say that the volunteers have gone to every single housing unit.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councilmember Salam. I'm going to pivot to Board of Elections. Wanting to focus on innovations to increase voter participation. Advocates have repeatedly requested that the voters at Rikers be provided with greater access to the vote. These mechanisms have included a polling place at the facility and a program similar to that provided to nursing home residents. Can you explain how nursing home residents vote?
Nursing home residents vote, again, under the umbrella of New York State election law. There are thresholds based on the numbers of individuals that reside in a particular nursing home. The number is escaping me off the top of my head. But suffice to say that not all nursing homes get this particular service. We do it under New York State election law. But when they meet the threshold, we send bipartisan teams to the nursing home in coordination with whatever their executive staff is, usually an executive director, and then we provide the absentee materials to the individuals that are in the nursing home. They vote those materials, we collect them back and bring them back to our borough offices.
What are the obstacles to implementing a program similar to the nursing home voting program for incarcerated individuals at Rikers?
Well, one of the main practical considerations is, and I'm going to put on my former mayor's office hat when I used to oversee the Department of Correction, is the disparate number of facilities, and you won't know, with the exception of, say, the facility that houses juveniles or the facility that houses females, which is 1 and 1. The other ones all have, could be spread out all over the island. And then that would be substantial coordination with the Department of Correction to be able to make sure that if this responsibility is going to be taken on by these 2 agencies, that we can do it responsibly and that we can do it ensuring that the voters get their ballots.
Now, when we transition fully to the borough-based jails, considering, it'll still be spread out, it'll be multiple facilities, but you'll have 4 boroughs, particularly, that will house individuals in custody. Do you think that would address some of the concerns that you have in that way?
Well, certainly, I'm very familiar with the location that was chosen in downtown Brooklyn, because it used to be the Brooklyn House. It was now then raised and now is being built as a new jail. In a high-rise jail facility where all of the persons in custody are in one place, that certainly would be an automatic streamline of process. And then we would have to work something out with the Department of Correction to make sure that we could have access. It's a conversation certainly worth having. But can I also add that one of the ways that we streamline the process was it came to our attention several years ago that the staff, the DOC staff that was working on this would individually go to all of the 5 borough offices to pick up the voting materials. What we have done in partnership with DOC is we have everything sent to the Queens location presently, since the work is occurring on Rikers Island and the DOC staff was in Queens. So there has been some streamlining that was done. We're certainly open to conversations about what further streamlining we can do in order to make sure that this process works more effectively.
Thank you. I'm going to yield on my questions, and I have a round 2, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. So first, we're going to hear from Councilmember Morano, Narcisse, and Caban. I know Caban has to leave, but these other folks were here first. Go ahead.
Thank you, chairs. Absolutely. I'll begin with correction if there's time for the Board of Elections as well. Just to drill down on feasibility, which I know both chairs asked you a bit about. You testified that you don't receive ballot deficiency notices and don't have system access. So how exactly are you supposed to implement ballot curing under this bill, in Intro 786?
Well, I think that kind of as a response to that, since ballot curing does align with the Board of Elections and their process and state law, in order for us to implement this legislation around curing, we would need to have further conversations with the law department. There would need to be state legislative changes, as mentioned by the Board of Elections, and to really identify our legal boundaries as a department.
How many people in DOC custody actually voted in the last election? Not registered, not eligible, but actually voted?
That would be a correction or a question for the Board of Elections.
Okay, I'll come back to them in a second then. You say you don't interfere with the ballots, but you collect and deliver them. What are the safeguards to ensure integrity in that process?
Thank you. Well, I think first and foremost, it's ensuring that our staff are trained on the process and are trained on ensuring that people have privacy and making independent choices that are nonpartisan. So any communication that we would be having is literally to deliver and also to then indicate or try to reduce any challenges like signing an envelope that would result in something needing to be cured, but would have nothing to do with the actual filling out of the document of the ballot.
Given the fluid population and unreliable contact information, which is just par for the course, isn't it likely that many ballots might simply fall through the cracks?
That would be hard for us to speculate, but I think with a fluid population, it would be hard for us to give a definitive answer on that.
Sure. In terms of the education and access process, you mentioned 16 registration drives per year and educational materials. You've described inputs, education, forms, outreach. In terms of the conversion rate from registration to actual ballots cast, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so typically we see registration numbers to be higher, and this is what we would know based on what somebody is handing back to us. And I would just like to also address or say formally, you know, people do have the autonomy to be able to mail this in directly, but what we have, and I don't have a conversion rate for you directly, we could get back to you on that, is that typically there are higher numbers of voter registration than there are people actually asking for an absentee ballot form.
Great, and I'll spend my last minute or two on Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan, if the council wants to get this right, what's the most important thing we should do to support the Board of Elections in making this system actually work?
Well, with respect to Intro 786, since we don't have any involvement in 797, the most effective way is to submit a resolution to the state legislature so that the state can incorporate this into the statutory framework so that we would have the legal authority to implement any changes. With respect to if the law doesn't change and what we could do is what we've been discussing, which is enhanced communication with the Board of Elections and the Department of Correction. I don't necessarily think that there's legislative action that's necessary to do that. I think that that can be reported back in these oversight hearings, and we should be held to the test that our deeds match our words and that we are working to improve the process.
So would you agree here that the goal should be not just access to a ballot, but a realistic opportunity for that ballot to be counted?
Yes, and I think in light of your question earlier to DOC, there were 621 ballots requested. 335 were returned and counted. So while that represents a 54% margin, in the general election with the general population, that margin was 73%. So there's always going to be a drop-off between the number that are requested and the number that are actually voted. For whatever reason, people do request absentee ballots and don't always return them. I will say that the return rate has spiked somewhat after the state legislature passed the early mail ballot legislation, because you no longer had to have an absolute excuse for not voting. You can apply for an early mail ballot, and that seems to be new people coming into that process. Of course, those incarcerated in Rikers Island would have been eligible either way.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Narcisse and then Caban.
I yield to my colleague's Caban since she has to go.
You're too nice.
That's so nice. It's because we matched today, right?
I'm a nurse, so.
Oh, I love that. You got the pink going. Good morning.
Good morning.
I just want to ask a couple of data questions before I dig into some of my other questions. But we're looking at a current census that's above 6,000, right?
Yes, our census is about 6,700.
Okay. And then out of that number, how many are eligible to vote? The vast majority are eligible to vote. Because either you have to be on post, like on some sort of supervision, or on post, where you wouldn't be on Rikers. Like the vast majority of people are eligible to vote, correct?
Yeah, we don't have the exact number for who's eligible to vote.
But would you say that it is the vast majority?
We could speculate that it could be the vast majority.
And then from the BOE numbers, we saw that just around 600 requested and around 300 returned ballots, correct?
335.
Yeah. Or we're just going to say yes, that's that. I just want to get on the record that there's a large population here that is eligible to vote that's not even requesting a ballot. I know that you guys know this, but I was a former defender. One of the things that I did after and during or before allocuting my client was to remind them that they retain their right to vote in the vast majority of cases, because our clients don't know that. And so I think that there's a lot of room for improvement, and this is something that the coalition has been working towards for years and years, and we haven't seen as much improvement as we would like. And so I think that's the basis for legislation here, to really pick up those numbers. Given that opened absentee ballots are not counted by the BOE, does DOC have a specific policy regarding opening mail that's labeled as an absentee ballot?
We would not be opening their mail, but we do, when we do these drives, and if we do receive a ballot that would be specific to go to somebody, we would forward it to the mailing address that we're aware of.
Okay. How many days on average does it take for mail that has been delivered to Rikers to reach the intended recipient? If the person's still in custody, they've requested that ballot.
So we work closely with the Board of Elections, and it's actually like a hand delivery process where we would be picking up those forms as a designated and agreed upon date, and then we would be distributing them thereafter right after. And then we would be, as we receive them back, bringing them back to the Board of Elections. So it's literally a hand-to-hand.
So would you say it happens? I just want to get more specifics on the record. You're saying that it gets picked up at the BOE and then given out by hand, but does that happen the same day? Like, what's the amount of time in between it getting picked up and it making it to the person who's requested the ballot?
It could really vary. It could be the same day. It could be within that week.
Okay. I would love, yeah, I would love to figure out how I mean, the difference also of a week is maybe the difference of somebody then going out and then you don't have an updated address. We know what happens when somebody's discharged from Rikers, and if they're being picked up by hand, I imagine there's the ability to get them in the hands at least in the next 24 to 48 hours so that you're not missing folks, because unfortunately, there are a lot of folks that are eligible to vote that come in and out with these super short sentences, whether it's 7 days, 14 days, 30-day sentences, and you could miss them entirely. And then these are people that are housing precarious usually, and then you can't find them, and then they miss the chance to vote. So I would love if you could follow up with us on what can be done to make that more quick and efficient. And actually, that was my next question, if there's a policy in place to expedite the delivery. And I know that it's the hand done, but is this the same process for court or immigration-related notices?
To be quite frank, I would have no idea.
Okay.
I don't oversee that.
Okay, I would love to get an answer on that. I know you weren't prepared for that question, so I understand you did. What type of oversight and record maintenance is conducted with regards to the names and numbers of voters registered and absentee ballots collected and returned by DOC?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure. What type of oversight and record maintenance is conducted with regards to the names and numbers of voters registered and absentee ballots collected and then returned by DOC?
So every person that we do engage with, that we are giving them a form or receiving one back, we do maintain their information in our own, data tracking system, so that we're aware of who we're actually interacting with, engaging with, and then can therefore expect to deliver back, ideally, an absentee ballot too. So we do manage that, but I would like to just say, you said oversight, that there is an annual report required of all city agencies, and we do comply and submit that on an annual basis.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Narcisse.
Thank you, Chairs, and thank you, Deputy Commissioner, and of course, the panel here. And my questions, some of them may be, like you can say that we repeat questions, but we have to have the clear understanding. If I may say that there's a percentage of folks in Rikers that don't have tablets, right? That don't have access to tablets. And how many of those? Because we can understand there's a gap in getting access to what they deserve.
Yeah, so if we're talking about like tablet operations and tablet distribution, we do have a portion of our population we call of the eligible population. We typically hover, and I don't have the exact number for today, but it's typically between 80% and 90% of people who are eligible for a tablet have received a tablet. Now there are some variables to that. If someone broke their tablet, they may no longer have that tablet in their possession, but they have been afforded a tablet. There's some additional variables when I say the word eligible. Typically what we're talking about is somebody who has transitioned out of new admission housing and has been here for over 30 days and is now in general population housing. So there are a few thousand active tablet users. Again, 80 to 90% of people who have been here over 30 days have a tablet or have been distributed one, but that doesn't always mean they have it in their possession.
Okay.
And if I may just add, for someone who might not have a tablet, they could still request a form through a staff member, through a counseling member. They can pick it up in a program area, like a law library, so people have different ways to register to vote.
Thank you. So we have some that don't have access. Okay, statistics shows that 63% absentee ballot completion rate citywide. Advocates report roughly about 20% in DOC facilities. Can the administration explain where the gap is coming from and what's being done right now to correct the gap?
Yeah, I think it would be hard to speculate on the exact gap of why somebody may not be interested in registering to vote and or interested in getting an absentee ballot, but I think in our own reflection on this and where we know that we can improve is making sure that we are increasing access. And so again, that's like taking our own reflection point and saying, is 16 drives with volunteers and the Legal Aid Society and partnering with DOC enough, or does there need to be more? So I think in our own acknowledgement that we need to increase our efforts around education and access to have that interactive voter experience, that experience that is a person-to-person conversation. This is why we have started to partner with a partnering organization to make sure that we have consistent weekly conversations with people in custody across multiple facility sites, again, much more regularly than 16 times a year.
The reason I'm asking question too, because I cannot imagine someone like Nelson Mandela did not have access to vote while he's in custody. So how are mistakes or lost ballots reported internally at DOC, and who is responsible for following up?
I'm sorry, you said.
If a ballot, how are mistakes, like there's mistake on the ballot or lost ballot reported internally at DOC?
So the curing process is really by state law and by design through the Board of Election, and it is not, the DOC is not aware.
So if it's lost, let's say somebody have a problem with the ballot, so immediately you have to call Board of Election, or what do you?
Yeah, if there was, if there was a ballot that something occurred when it went to the Board of Elections, that there was a mistake on it, and that goes into the curing process, we would not be readily aware of that information. That is in the purview of the Board of Elections as per state law for curing.
Okay. Have there been instances where DOC staff delayed? So the DOC, let me understand. DOC doesn't get involved at all in the ballot, or you get involved?
Our role is, we've called it facilitation. Our role is making sure that people have access as requested to facilitate the access to the ballot, and then facilitate, if it's returned back to the department, that we then bring it physically to the Board of Elections.
Got it. So now, have there been instances where DOC staff delay ballot delivery, or how were those handled? How those handled? And is the delivery timeline tracked?
So when we receive a ballot, there is, we're making sure that we're delivering it in the timeline prescribed and as defined to us by the Board of Election. So they would give us a defined date that we would have to return the ballots back. And since we are hand delivering those ballots, we would be bringing them to the Board of Elections by that date.
Since my time is up, so thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. For the, Mr. Ryan, what are the most common reasons that ballots are from Rikers are not counted? Are there certain rejections that are common, and how can we address them?
So we have provided a laminated card which gives instructions on how to fill out the absentee ballot form. Typically, the most common one is the missing signature. So much in the same way that the signature provides access to the ballot for voter registration purposes, the signature is what tells us legally that you voted this ballot and you want it to count under your registration. So if there's a missing signature, we have to reject that and request. So the bad news is that some ballots get rejected. The good news is that the New York State Legislature has implemented a cure process, and people take advantage of it, including those who are currently housed on Rikers Island, take advantage of it to fix a mistake that was on the absentee ballot envelope.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Now, do you think that, obviously we have a June primary, maybe some specials in between, I don't know, and then obviously November. Do you think within some of those windows that the Board of Elections could send some staff to Rikers to supplement both what correction is doing and the volunteers, at least to see what's going on and to see how they could improve it, or you could improve it? Is that possible?
Chair, I can commit to you that we will take a hard look at that process, communicate with the Department of Corrections, and come back to you with an initial assessment.
Thank you very much, sir. That means yes. I know you. The other thing I want to say is for the computer, et cetera, at the facility. So I know you said everybody, I know, I've been there, I've seen all the wonderful iPads, but you got internet issues sometimes. Even those of us who look at a ballot, and I certainly know them pretty well, I don't know half of the people I'm voting for. I'm gonna be honest with you. So judges, et cetera, it's all there. Ballot initiative, it's complicated. And if you're not plugged in, people ask me what is on the ballot. So it's one thing to register, but then you get nervous, maybe you're not doing the right thing, et cetera. So what is the curriculum? People might even, with more education and push, you might get more people saying, how do I register on my iPad? If the internet is working, if the iPad is working, et cetera. So what, in addition to, we have volunteers, we have staff that's doing this, what else do we do to make sure the iPad could register people? And then explaining why it's important to do so. And then, of course, once you get the ballot, somebody has to explain to you what's on it. It's a lot. It's not a one-step process.
So on the tablet, people are able to request to receive an absentee ballot form or a voter registration form.
Yep.
The curriculum that is facilitated by our counseling team goes over why it's important to vote, what voting looks like in New York City, what voting looks like on Rikers. Also, in partnership with the New York Campaign Finance Board, we obtain voter education guides, which are available on the tablet and also in program spaces like in a law library. So those voter education guides really show who is on the ballot and provide that information to people in our care.
Okay, I'm glad they read it, because people in my neighborhood don't read it, so I'm glad that folks at Rikers do. I wanted one more question for Board of Elections, then I'll turn it over to my co-chair. Can you explain again the legal and logistical issues that you feel are a challenge with putting a polling place at Rikers Island? Can you be specific?
Yes, and I provided the committee with a series of letters that have gone back and forth with it. Just keep in mind that there have been some changes to the election law since 2024, most notably the early mail ballot, which expands opportunities and the process, as well as if you request an absentee ballot, you can't vote on a machine, which does not apply to this population. In any event, in a series of conversations with the State Board of Elections, it is the considered legal opinion of both the City Board and the State Board of Elections that the absentee ballot process is presently the only legal mechanism available for individuals to vote who will not be present within their home district on Election Day, including overseas, military, others that request, and people who are presently detained in Rikers Island.
That's clear, thank you. Councilmember Wang has joined us, and I'll turn it back over to my co-chair for more second round questions.
Thank you. Going back to the Board of Elections, just wanting to pick up where we left off. Has the Board of Elections compared voting participation rates in Rikers to other jurisdictions with jail-based voting to identify best practices?
No, we haven't. We don't have access to the rolling data that's associated with the Rikers Island population. So if you went strictly off of raw numbers of people who were eligible to vote, who were at some point during a calendar year in Rikers Island, that wouldn't give you a clear picture. And what you would ultimately get is a snapshot of who's there in a moment in time. And having attended at one time in my life the population control meetings every Friday at the Department of Elections for 3 years, that population changes every day. And so if you have 500 people, okay, but if there are 500 different people, well, then that creates a tracking problem. I don't have any good answers on how that could be tracked. I'm certain we could have a conversation with the Department of Correction to see if they have any ideas, but I think the fluidity of the Rikers Island population presents tracking challenges for sure.
I would love to work with you as well as the Department of Corrections to really try to look at some of that, and Chair Brewer, of course, to look at some of that raw data, right? Because even if we took that snapshot to be able to compare to see, well, in this moment of time, these different facilities had these amount of people in custody that were registered to vote, that requested a ballot, because it would kind of give some level of perspective, I would argue, in terms of what will give you a greater sense of participation versus not. And while the sample size may be small, it still could maybe give us a little context with that. But thank you for sharing your thoughts on it. Last question is, has the BOE ever had discussions even with other jurisdictions that have implemented polling places within jail? Like, have you even had a conversation on this?
So the answer to that question is no. As the law remains the way that we believe it remains and has been directed to us by the State Board of Elections, we don't believe it's a conversation to have until we have enabling legislation.
Thank you for that. Chair, I would say that's the end of my questions, but what I did take from today's conversation is we have a voting community that has for quite some time actually been not necessarily prioritized as the general public that's not in custody in terms of being able to exercise their right to vote. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity that exists here that we can collaborate legislatively with our state colleagues as well as the Board of Elections and the Department of Corrections. And I look forward to engaging with everyone around this. Thank you.
Councilmember Salam, you have questions?
Yes, thank you. Just get right to it. So, to the Board of Elections, in June of 2024 primary, only 72 of the 364 ballot requests from Rikers Island resulted in counted votes. How many of those rejected ballots had curable defects? And how many of those curable defects were successfully cured by voters still in DOC custody?
In 2024?
Yes.
I don't have that information before me presently. I am certain it is accessible from our system, and I will provide the same to you after this hearing concludes.
I appreciate that.
Sure.
And to the DOC, under the bill's 7 business day return requirement for cure affirmations, what operational challenges, staffing additions, or transportation adjustments would be necessary beyond the current once-weekly courier trip to the Board of Queens office?
This is associated with the curing legislation?
I believe so.
I think really where it needs to start for us, and just to kind of emphasize from our point of view, is that curing is part of the state law requirements of the Board of Elections. And so we really would need to have further conversations with the council and with the law department and with the Board of Elections to see what those challenges would be.
Also, the department currently relies on the Vote in NYC Jails Coalition and other volunteers for the most direct voter registration work, and selects which facilities are visited. How frequently is each housing unit on Rikers Island visited for voter registration in a calendar year, and what criteria determine facility selection?
Thank you so much for that question. And so our goal and intention is that if we're affording 16 voter registration drives a year, that means that every facility gets visited. But through those voter registration drives in and of itself alone, that would mean each facility gets visited about twice a year from those volunteers and from the Voting on Rikers working group. And then it is our responsibility as a department and as an agency to make sure that any housing unit that wasn't visited during those voter registration drives are given equal access to voter registration forms and are given equal access to voter registration education as well.
Thank you. The bill requires disaggregation by race, age, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability status, and veteran status. Does the department currently collect each of those data points in a form comparable to voter registration tracking? And if not, what systems changes would be needed by the January 31st, 2027 reporting deadline?
Thank you so much. And I just want to highlight and begin with transparency is really a cornerstone of this administration being led under Commissioner Richards. And so some of that data, I would have to get back on every single aspect of the data to see how we're gathering it, because when we're collecting forms back, we're not necessarily collecting demographics in that fashion. But the department would like to work with council to see how we can identify giving this information as applicable and associated with voter registration and absentee ballot access.
Thank you. Thank you, chairs.
Thank you very much. You are all free to go, but we appreciate very much your testimony. Do not think this is the end of this conversation. And so I want to say the same thing as my colleague. We're really, really serious about getting 5,000 people, whatever the number is, eligible to vote at Rikers Island. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mike Ryan, also.
Thank
all
you.
very much.
Thank you.
So
Have a
then-
good day, all.
You too. So now we're going to open the hearing for public testimony. I remind the public, this is a government proceeding. Decorum shall be observed at all times. Members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from that table. Members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts to the Sergeant at Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak, as you know, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms and then be recognized. For our first panel, it's very special. We have invited members of the Vote in New York City Jails Coalition, who are an actor, a stakeholder, very much so, in voter registration and voting on Rikers Island. These panelists will have 5 minutes to speak. Obviously, if you have a statement or written testimony you want to submit, please provide a copy to the Sergeant at Arms. You can also email it, any written testimony, to testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of the close of the hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. And once your name is called, please come up to the table. And we will call Victor Pats, Takesha Newton, Anthony Posada, Michael Klinger, Kai Rosenthal, and Robert Whitaker. Those are all from the coalition. Thank you very much. Come on up. And whomever would like to start, feel free. You have 5 minutes. You have a lot of time to talk. We're giving you a lot of time, and we appreciate you being here.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much, Council Member Brewer and Council Member Powers, and to all that have had a hand in creating this platform. My name is Victor Pate. I am a member of the Vote in Jails Coalition. I am also a formerly incarcerated person that was detained on Rikers Island. And I would first like to say that by no means the things that I may say, you might hear me say, is any way disparaging or even to dilute those who worked with us in this coalition of Department of Correction. And I'd first like to say that New Yorkers that are detained in jails lack the same access that voters who are not detained, in spite of the fact saying that it is provided full access to ballot box. I can tell you for sure it sounds good, but I am one of those who actually go to Rikers Island and have been doing this registration for about 3 years now. And I can tell you that process is not as good working as it says. And I will just take a few moments just to kind of sort of walk you through what that process actually looks like, the mechanics of it. So we all usually gather at the Boulevard Building, which is, is Department of Corrections corporate office. We're met by a DOC staff member who has a waiting van for us. We are loaded up into the van and we're taken to the designated facility for that particular day to begin the voter registration process. We're given 2 transparent backpacks, which includes the voter registration and the absentee ballot forms, whatever other information that may be available at the time. We, depending on the amount of volunteers that are available for that day, we either go into one group or we go into 2 separate groups to the designated dormitories. One of the things that we have been trying to get for the longest and is also still not on a regular basis is the signage of notification that we're coming. I kind of sort of find it kind of odd is the fact that we have a registration calendar for the year. How come we don't have signage and notifications that are also put up in the various dormitories that we will be visiting for that particular day, which we've been working on for such a long, long time. And it works sometimes and it doesn't work sometimes. I think there should be improvement in that particular process in itself. Once we're into the dormitories, either one of us usually announces who we are, what we're there for, and usually we're directed to an area in that particular dormitory, or if it's a cell block area, to where we can actually sit with the detainees and actually do the registration and absentee ballot process in itself. Once this is completed, it is then up to DOC to transmit the completed forms and the absentee ballots to the BOE. Therein lies, I guess, room for much improvement, and therein also lies the fact that when we are actually on Rikers Island doing these actual registration, oftentimes, if the dormitory is available for us to be in a room where we can actually do the registration, oftentimes detainees may not be in the dormitory at that particular time. There may be some programmatic things going on at that particular time, but more importantly, they normally don't know we're coming there until we actually announce that we are there to do the voter registration. It is really amazing that the people that we are actually going there to register are actually looking forward and would be interested in registering to vote if they had more information, especially when I said about the notification and the signage, which oftentimes is or is not existent. But the other important piece about this here is that, and you've mentioned this before about the civic engagement. Now, we heard, the mention about the civic engagement, which in my humble opinion does not actually happen on a regular basis, although they may say they do it. And I personally asked the detainees once we're there, do you get civic engagement? And they give me this incredulous look like, what's that? So I would beg to differ when they say there's an ongoing, robust civic engagement. I don't think that that's actually happened, although it may be happening periodically, and just what particular facilities these happen in. Most of the facilities that I've went to, I've asked, and they give me the same look like, what's that? The other piece we also heard mentioned here is the fact that voters' information is supposed to be on the tablet. Most of the time, when we go in there, we're doing civic engagement one-on-one on the spot. So the fact of the matter that, that's the bell, right? Okay.
Finish up your sentence.
So the fact of the matter that there's a robust civic engagement going on, I beg to differ, that say that it does not happen. If it does, it's very far and in between. This process, it's good to say that they have full access to the ballot box, which I, in fact, know that does not actually apply to Rikers Island, and a lot more needs to be done to improve this process.
Thank you. Michael?
Good morning. Good afternoon. Thank you to Chairs Brewer and Brooks Powers, their staffs, and to both committee staff for highlighting the critical issue of voting in the city jails. My name is Michael Klinger. I'm a jail services attorney with Brooklyn Defenders, which is a proud member of the Vote in New York City Jails Coalition. I'd like to briefly address the legislation on today's agenda. Intro 786 would require the Department of Correction to report on the number of notices and cure affirmations received from the Board of Elections to be delivered to voters in city custody for the purposes of curing, as well as the number of cure affirmations returned to the Board of Elections. This bill takes a critical step forward in helping to understand whether the board and the department are meaningfully meeting the requirements of state election law, section 9-209, which requires an opportunity for voters to cure when a defect is deemed curable. Intro 797 would require the department to report the number of voter registration events it facilitates, the number of completed registration forms it receives from people in custody, and the number of absentee ballots it distributes to people in custody. This bill would enhance the reporting already required under City Charter Section 1057A by requiring greater detail about how registration is conducted. The current reporting is so shrouded that the department can count placing forms in the law library, the same as a volunteer-led outreach visit into the housing units. This bill would help shed much more light on that process. We must acknowledge that to the extent Intro 786 seeks information from the Board of Elections, it does so through a request to the department. The board is a creature of state law, and we understand the necessity of this approach. I will be submitting written testimony that will include some proposed additions intended to enhance the granularity of the reporting that the department is asked to include, even if it must rely on the board for that data. But the more important request to share with the council today involves a return to first principles. The council, the Board of Elections, and the Department of Correction should be able, and in fact, I think we heard Executive Director Ryan say they would be able to commit themselves to greater collaboration and particularly sharing basic data on outcomes that may extend beyond the requirements of the city charter and even the state election law. The efforts of this volunteer coalition are only successful to the extent the other parties cooperate. And we urge the council to take this opportunity and this budget season opportunity to forge an understanding with the board that basic periodic reporting is critical to identifying both how this project is faring and where additional resources may be most useful. Finally, we encourage the council to review the July 2025 report from the Sentencing Project, Voting from Prison, Lessons from Maine and Vermont. Those are two states where people are permitted to vote even while serving a state sentence. But many of the lessons apply to our jails as well. There are a few straightforward technocratic suggestions, some of which were alluded to here today, such as providing increased access to candidate and referendum information through tablet programming, and increasing access to online voter registration using laptops during scheduled voter registration visits. The report also calls on jails to create official voting rights policies and staff guidance, educate all staff on the voting rights of people in the jails, to formalize working relationships with voting rights partners like us at this table, and make a meaningful staffing commitment of more than just 1 or 2 people to administering the critical work of civic engagement in the jails. The report concludes that the only way to truly provide equitable access to voting is to implement on-site polling locations. And we look forward to working through the practicability challenges with you all in achieving this for New York City. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Takesha LaShawn Newton. I am the lead community organizer in our community justice unit at the Legal Aid Society, and I am the lead volunteer coordinator for our Voting in Jails Coalition. I have been going into Rikers since late 2019. I am the initial person who received an ID to not be escorted by an officer and to assert the civic engagement to our constituents incarcerated. For 6 years now, I can tell you what I have viewed. I've heard the word integrity mentioned here, and the DOC officials who were at this table before us did not show integrity. So I want to be clear that the DOC staff does nothing when we are going in to extend voting privileges to our constituents incarcerated. They just stand around and assert fear-mongering tactics. Everyone that goes in to volunteer are trained by us. They receive an email with all the information that they need and also a training meeting. However, as Victor mentioned, when we go to the Belova building, we are met there with procrastination tactics, supposedly training. We are also only told that we can take 13 people in with us because the van only holds a certain amount of people. DOC staff will also assert members of their own to join us that are not included in the number that we were given. A laminated information document was mentioned. We also don't know where that comes from. Not everyone has a tablet at Rikers Island. And if they do, they barely work. They can't even pull up the information to try and inform someone that they would like to vote. Aside from that, in the community as a grassroots organizer, when I register people to vote in the community, I take their voter registration forms to the BOE office and I am given a receipt. For years, we have asked for data and receipts, and we have been presented with nothing. If there is no A or B officer in the dorm or cell area, those constituents will not have the right to vote at all. If an individual is moved to another building, they have no right to vote. If an officer comes to the location and the person incarcerated is not there and maybe they're at the mess hall eating, right? That officer will not come back with that ballot to ensure that that person can actually vote. If the CEO simply doesn't like how loud it is in an area, they will say we cannot go there. If a signature on an absentee ballot form does not match the registration form, the BOE will deny that person the access to vote. I'm sorry, I'm just viewing my notes to make sure I did not miss anything. 41 seconds left. I will say that if we have 6,000 people incarcerated, tell me how we are doing a great service by only going in once a month and reaching one facility. It is absurd. We should have more vans, we should have more staff available. And over more, we want a polling site at this city jail. The same way that they can gather up people from all of these different neighborhoods throughout New York City and incarcerate them, and they have not been convicted of a crime, then they can get the means together to ensure that they can vote because it is their constitutional right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to provide testimony. My name is Robert Willis. I'm Justice Advocate Coordinator at Latino Justice. For over 50 years, we've worked to improve racial justice and build a more equitable society. But today I'm speaking as someone who is formerly incarcerated, who returned to Rikers Island to engage in voters' registration efforts. What I witnessed was not just neglect, but systematic disregard. I saw complete voter forms and ballots thrown into the trash, not misplaced, discarded. That's not accidental, that is a failure by design. In 2021, New York restored voter rights to individuals not currently serving felony sentence. But without polling sites and jails, that remains inaccessible in practice. Thousands of eligible voters in detention are still effectively silenced. The data makes it clear. In 2022, only 419 people were registered to vote at Rikers Island out of a population in the thousands, and not a single absentee ballot was reported as cast. In 2023, that number dropped to 331 registrations. Again, no ballots cast. Even in 2024, when registration rose to 1,325, the system still failed. During the June primary, only 155 absentee ballots were distributed and just 72 were returned out of a population over 6,300 people. In November's general election, 977 ballots were issued, but only 546 were counted. In 2025, the pattern continued. During the June primary, 271 ballots were issued, but only 178 were counted. And in the November general election, 654 ballots applications submitted, only 374 were issued, and 98 were ultimately counted. Give me 1 second. And 98 were ultimately counted. At every stage, the system has failed. Distribution and the return of people's ballots, and people are being locked out from voting. Even at the peak, fewer than 10% of eligible individuals were able to cast ballots. This is not a functioning system, it is a barrier. The solution is straightforward. A polling site needs to be established at Rikers Island. Not just one, but sites, making it accessible for all to engage without causing too much disruption. This is the only way to ensure meaningful access to the ballot and uphold the fundamental right to vote. We also need transparency and tracking mechanisms so that both the Board of Elections and the Department of Corrections can be held accountable. We cannot continue to accept a system that disenfranchises thousands of eligible voters. That work has already begun at the state level with the Free to Vote Act. But we must continue to put pressure on all that seek to undermine the fundamental right of vote. Thank you for your time, and I hope you join us in standing up for the right to vote. And I just want to close. In Harris County in Houston, Texas, and Texas is not a bastion of, trying to get access to vote. They allow people to vote at any polling site in the county. That same premise can be applied to Rikers as it looks at Rikers Island. If a community like that has undermined the vote can still agree to allow people to vote as just members of their community, we can apply that to Rikers Island. I just wanted to add that there because keeping people's humanity in focus is important at this time. Thank you very much. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Next. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Brewer and Chair Brooks Powers, for the opportunity to testify. My name is Anthony Posada, and I'm a supervising attorney in the Legal Aid Society's Community Justice Unit and a founding member of the Vote in New York City Jails Coalition. I'll focus my testimony today on some of the history of the coalition and the systemic failures that we've noticed with the existing program. Our coalition is composed of directly impacted New Yorkers, legal service providers, civic engagement groups, and elected officials that was created in 2020 to address the unmet needs of eligible voters detained in New York City jails. We have consistently advocated for polling sites in these jails. In New York, anyone who is incarcerated while serving on a misdemeanor conviction or because they cannot afford their bail is eligible to vote. As of right now, close to 7,000 individuals who are at Rikers Island retain their right to vote. There are no voting sites in New York City jails, and therefore, individuals who wish to vote are at the mercy of the Department of Corrections each election day. Accordingly, the majority of New Yorkers detained on Rikers Island who regularly have their rights violated, their voices silenced, and their humanity denied by this city agency and its actors also have their fundamental right to vote taken from them. Our coalition visits Rikers Island monthly to provide vital education and necessary paperwork for voter registration and absentee ballot requests. The coalition also advocates with lawmakers and city agencies to improve the voting process for detained New Yorkers, including calling for a polling site within the jail. Our experience working with eligible voters detained at Rikers Island has revealed the systemic failures of both the Board of Elections and the Department of Corrections to provide true access to the ballot under the current absentee ballot voting framework, which is why we need a polling site at Rikers Island. When we started going into Rikers Island to facilitate voting in 2016, we did so around the same time that the governor was issuing pardons for people on parole to have their rights restored to vote. The first thing that we encountered was that, even as we encounter today, there is a wave of misinformation for people who are at Rikers Island about their rights to vote. Many of them believe that they're not eligible to vote. Some of them believe that because they have had prior convictions that they cannot vote. And so that is the first thing that is very apparent, that there needs to be a consistent and ongoing education program that tells people that they do have a right to vote and that encourages them to vote. The second thing that we notice is that voting in Rikers Island was entirely dependent on volunteer efforts, so that it is dependent on us to go in and register voters and supply them with the absentee ballot and the education to know that they are eligible to vote. As Takesha and Victor have already illustrated, the DOC staff who are in charge of this program have so many steps to take in this process and so little resources that are insufficient for them that frequently what happens is that people are denied the right to vote. This process, we need a polling site. If we truly care about fair and free elections and full participation in the democratic process, we must ensure full and equal ballot access for New Yorkers in jails, most of whom are awaiting trial and cloaked in the presumption of innocence. The absentee ballot voting system always leaves incarcerated voters behind, and one person disenfranchised is one person too many. New York City should join the many other counties throughout the country by providing polling sites in all jails to ensure each voter is given a real opportunity to have their voice heard. We need polling sites in New York City jails. In Cook County in November 2024, in that presidential election, 1,922 individuals voted successfully while incarcerated at the Cook County Jail. Nearly a third of them were people in custody. People incarcerated in Cook County have been able to vote in person since 2020 and has been called the city's most active precinct. In the election prior to the opening of jail-based polling sites, only 434 incarcerated people were able to vote to submit an absentee ballot. We should strengthen the absentee ballot process by requiring the Board of Elections to facilitate the voting program and ensuring voters have access to the agency directly, including registration forms, education materials, and absentee ballot request forms. While both agencies, as we saw today, pass responsibility off to the other, the impact upon communities of color is devastating. 92% of individuals currently detained in New York City jails are non-white. The organizations within the Vote in New York City Jails coalitions have fought for equity on this issue, grounded in the reality that these policies are part of a practice that dates back to the founding of this country that seeks to exclude these same communities from full participation in American life. New Yorkers who are detained in jails must be given the same opportunity as all of us to have their voices heard, which is why we need a polling site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Thank you, Chairs Brewer and Brooks Power, and members and staff of both committees for convening the hearing today. I'm Kai Rosenthal, co-president of the League of Women Voters of the City of New York, a nonpartisan, grassroots, volunteer-led organization committed to civic participation and voting rights, and a proud founding partner of the Vote in New York City Jails Coalition. The League is here today with our coalition partners to bring to the forefront priority issues of accessing the vote at Rikers. Today, I want to focus on voter education. The people detained at Rikers have a uniquely large and dramatic stake in how the city is governed. They are more directly affected by decisions made about courts, public defense, housing, healthcare, policing, and pay equity than almost any other single population. The vast majority of people detained there are pretrial and retain their full right to vote. They are not just outside our democracy, they are part of it. The League has spent over a century doing the work that transforms a legal right into an exercised one, helping people understand what is on their ballot, which issues affect their lives, how government works, and why their participation matters. That work requires sustained civic education. At Rikers, it is almost entirely absent. The Department of Correction devotes one staff role at half-time to civic engagement for the entire population, about 7,000 people. The approved civics presentation is outdated and rarely reaches those who need it. Tablets, the primary vehicle for sharing information, are unevenly distributed and frequently broken. Through the coalition's efforts, the 2025 mayoral debates and the League's civic explainer, Who Makes New York City Run, were made available on those tablets, but access remains inconsistent. At one of the coalition's monthly voter registration days at Rikers last week, people were hungry for basic information. Who is on the ballot? What do they stand for? What do these offices do? Why does my vote matter? Those are not complicated questions. They are exactly what civic education is supposed to answer, and the DOC is not answering them. We welcome the DOC's plan to add 2 external civic programming staff. It is a step in the right direction, but it is absolutely not enough. Civic education may not be a legal requirement, but the League believes it is a government obligation. Democracy does not sustain itself. It requires investment, especially in the communities most often excluded from it. Volunteers and coalition partners should not be the last line of defense against systemic disenfranchisement and engagement. An educated voting population requires regular access to the internet as well as public community forums and events. Voters at Rikers lack these opportunities to obtain voter information that you and I enjoy year-round. The city's charter and local laws list many affirmative requirements for agencies around voter registration. The city should enact the same type of affirmative requirements to ensure and protect a person's right to voter education and information. We are calling for a comprehensive civic education program at Rikers, sustained, multilingual, and properly resourced. Not a pamphlet, not a one-time presentation, but regular, frequent programming that prepares detained New Yorkers to participate meaningfully in our democracy. We are also asking for a polling site at Rikers, which is essential to protecting voting rights of this community. The League and Coalition stand ready to work with the Council to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know my colleague has questions, but I have a couple. One is, I don't know if any of the coalition or your members have funding dedicated specifically to maintaining this program for voter registration at Rikers? That's question number one. And then the second one is, we did hear about these monthly meetings, right? And we heard a little bit of who participates, who doesn't. So I'd love to hear from you. How often does the coalition meet with the Department of Correction, with the Board of Elections, and how do those meetings go, and how would you like them to improve, if at all? Sort of what is the program, and how could it be improved with communication? Whomever would like to start.
I can answer the question about funding. We don't require funding. We provide our time and services to our constituents that are incarcerated, and we are there for them. We are open to extending more of our time, and not only one day a month, to assist the Department of Corrections with our constituents. We also have a monthly meeting with the Department of Corrections. The Board of Elections previously joined some of those meetings. We haven't seen them in the most recent meetings.
We're going to try to get them there.
Thank you.
The other question I have is just, these tablets that, are referred to. I've been to Rikers a lot. Can you just talk about whether to me, if you're going to register, you kind of want to know what I'm registering for. So that would mean that you need information. So the question is, what is the tablet situation, even though some of you mentioned it? And then second, do you think, like I do, that it's one thing to have the information that's at your fingertips to register, but you'd like to know what it is that you're registering for? So my question is just the tablet situation first. And then second, you need to have the education that goes with it. So how could those two be better coordinated?
So the tablets are not reliable. So being that they are not reliable, you want to be able to have direct communication with another human who is knowledgeable in this area. You want to have documentation readily available to you. And unless we have the Board of Elections officials having that direct communication with our constituents, we are doing ourselves a disservice. Anybody else want to?
I agree with everything Ms. Newton said, but I would add that at Brooklyn Defenders, we know from working with the people that we work for who are in custody at Rikers that When they receive a tablet depends on factors that we have very little visibility into. We heard today in the testimony that it's getting out of intake, out of EMTC, plus 30 days, or maybe it was the 30 days in intake, and then you become eligible. We've heard in the past 45 days, we've heard 60 days. We haven't necessarily observed anybody getting a tablet on any particular timetable, although my guess is that the department does try to hit that 30-day mark. But once someone gets a tablet, it is the easiest thing to lose. And the reason for that, well, the reasons for that are many. And one of the things that we heard today, and we've heard it from the department before, is that they have a good statistic. Something like 80% of people who have been given a tablet, I think the way they can phrase it is 80% of people have been given a tablet. Whether or not they have that tablet still or access to any tablet is a different question, and they don't provide a number for that. A significant percentage of the people that we work with have lost their tablet. The department frames it, and even did today in testimony, as if they broke their tablet. I don't think I've met a person who broke their own tablet. They treasure their tablets. Their tablets are, among other things, phones that they can use. They can use those phones to call 311, to call for medical. They can use those phones to speak with family members. These are prized possessions. But what happens is you turn it in to be charged, and sometimes it gets given back to someone who's not you. And that person doesn't have an incentive to maintain that tablet, and they might break it. Things happen to these tablets. The upshot is that we think that, while not a totally illusory promise, it's almost there. The number of people who actually have access to a working tablet is small, we believe. We don't actually know because there was no data on that. So I would just say that's like a good, from my perspective anyway, background to understanding that if there is critical election information on tablets, the number of people who have access to it is low.
Just to add, the tablets also, because many individuals have shared and shown us what's on the tablets, the voter information is at the very, very bottom. So you have to scroll through pages and pages of different aspects of life at Rikers, and voter information is at the bottom. And then when you click on that, all the outdated information is at the top. So the way it's organized is not beneficial. Where it is on the tablet, and we have asked the Department of Corrections to provide a new tab on the tablet just for voter information. We've asked some of this and have not received, an update.
Lastly, if I could just add, a successful civic engagement education program needs to prioritize meeting people and speaking to them about the importance of voting, and not just claiming to put a poster in a facility and saying that that is sufficient as education for them. So we need to actually put people that are speaking to them and that are also helping them once they receive their ballots, because as we all know, when we go to vote, we're met with a team of people that are there to answer our questions, versus when people at Rikers Island receive their ballots, if they don't fill it out or they have questions, they can't go to anybody to help them answer. And therefore, this also leads to the gaps in people not filling out their ballots properly and not being able to vote. And lastly, if I just can go back to your question earlier about funding, it's not so much that we don't require, but we don't have it, right? This is a volunteer-based coalition. We're all adding what we can in terms of the resources that each of our organization has to offer, but we don't have it, and if we did have it, right, there's possibly more things that we could be doing to engage even more voters at New York City jails. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. I wanted to touch on two different topics. The first one is logistics and coordination with DOC and BOE. Are there limitations on which facilities or units you can visit? And I know we had a Zoom yesterday, but we'd like to get this on the record as well. Anyone can answer.
Yes, as the Department of Corrections mentioned earlier, we are only given 1 day of access a month, 2 days when it is closer to the June primaries, and 2 days when it is closer to the general election in November.
And are there any facilities or units you have not been able to access?
in a given year, we seem to go to each facility once. Occasionally, we go to them twice. I know earlier the DOC mentioned we go into Rikers 16 times. I know of only 14 times. As Ms. Newton said, once a month, usually 2 months out of the year, we go twice. In April, we are going twice. So before the primary, we only go to 5 or 6 facilities. So 4 or 5 facilities are not, no one goes in there to ask if they want to register to vote, to provide any sort of voter information or election information.
And are there any specific concerns that incarcerated people mention when you interact with them regarding the registration or voting process?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, I have been going into Rikers for 6 consecutive years. So I have seen people incarcerated over and over who have registered with me, completing a voter registration application and an absentee ballot, and I have been informed that they have not received the ballot at all. And I know that they completed the documents with me, but once we hand the documents over to the Department of Corrections staff, it is kind of out of our hands. Another issue that I would like to mention, that I forgot to mention, is this. In 2019 and in 2020, we have constituents that were denied the right to vote because the absentee ballots that they provide are only good for 1 year. And the absentee ballots only has the name of the DOC official that will retrieve them. And these specific forms that had this DOC official's name, the person was no longer employed by the Department of Corrections. So those people could not vote. We had to wait until they generated new absentee ballot forms with a new DOC official's name, and then those constituents then had to sign that new document in order for them to access a right to a ballot, and that is a very big issue.
That's a huge issue.
I would like to add on just a little bit to
Please.
that. And one of the things that I've heard to the detainees, and they ask me, well, what's going to happen, after you all collect our, documents and stuff. So I basically give them, as much information I can in terms of the transmittal, what that process is, and when it comes time for the election, that you will be handed a ballot. Well, one of the things that a few of them told me is that when they did receive their ballots, right, and through program staff or whomever that delivers the ballots to them, right, they don't have an assistant to help them complete it, because a lot of them, it's the very first time in their life that they ever even seen a ballot or actually ever have the opportunity to vote. So what they have difficulty oftentimes is completing the actual ballot so that they can vote. And oftentimes it's a frustrating process for them to have somebody give you something and say, here's your ballot, now fill it out. You've never seen a ballot before in your life. The only thing you know that people came some months earlier, had you fill out the voter registration and absentee ballot, and now here it is, you actually have the ballot, but then there's nobody there to assist you and help you in completing that process. That's, to me, defeats the purpose of what we do to enfranchise people. And without that additional measure of help or assistance and direction, you're still not voting. So that's a lost vote. So to me, that's a system that needs to have a little bit more assistance. And once they get the ballots, that they do have assistance, if they need it, for them to complete the ballots.
No, thank you for that as well. Pivoting to current challenges and ideas for improvement, What challenges are there in collecting the completed registration forms from incarcerated individuals? And have you noticed particular events in the process? And I know you gave us somewhat of an example, but where the ballots or registration forms are most often rejected or otherwise delayed? Like, is there like a pattern that you see for a certain dynamic that leads to them being rejected or delayed by any chance?
Well, I think I can just speak to a small portion of that. From our perspective, you know, our process is that once we complete the ballots and everything is done, we review them to make sure they're filled out properly and correctly, right? And we hold them until we finish the process for the day. At the end of that particular process, we turn it over to DOC. Now, the process from that point on, I have no clue. I really don't. Honestly, I don't know what happens after that. But there is supposed to be a time frame from which that particular point, when we finish registration for that day, hand it to the DOC employees, then the next process of transmittal happens to them. Now, what that timeline is, I have no clue because they never said we're going to take these to BOE within this particular time.
Are there any like timestamps, or like does the coalition do any form of tracking? Like, you probably don't have a copy per se, but is there a system in which you have a list of who you've sat with, who you've gotten to complete or make these requests that you are able to follow up? And is there a way of timestamping that? Because I'm just trying to figure out, it seems like there is a process happening, but it's not a full loop in a sense.
You are so accurate. So I have actually personally created a document so that we can actually track the names of people, track who completed an absentee ballot, who completed a registration form. Sometimes people will say, I'm already registered and I voted prior to becoming detained. And we will inform them, okay, in that case, you only need to complete an absentee ballot. We created this form and we sent it in. DOC denied it. And what I have found is that we have staff that work for the Department of Corrections that create their own agenda along the way. They make their own rules along the way. Because why would you not want to use this document that can actually track how many people we interacted with throughout the day? Now, yes, I take a general mental note of how many people we register when we are there. But as far as the proof of the documentation, as I mentioned, the Department of Corrections has denied us to bring in those materials.
Just to add to that, there is very little transparency in what happens to the voter registration absentee ballot applications once we have turned them over to the Department of Corrections. We don't know when they are delivered to the Board of Elections, when ballots might be picked up before, whether it be special elections, primaries, or general elections. We have asked for that information. And I found it somewhat alarming earlier during the DOC's testimony because they seem to not understand their own process of when they do deliver it to the Board of Elections. The person who was responsible for civic engagement at Rikers previously, who's no longer there, he told us directly he delivered the voter registration and absentee ballot applications on a Monday, and he would pick up the absentee ballots on a Thursday. Obviously, that would be before an election when the ballots were available. So that was the process that we were told, but in terms of numbers and all of that, we have very little transparency.
Is there anything you think the council could do to improve access to the franchise for incarcerated people, like legislatively? Is there anything specific, whether it be the legislation we're hearing today, or if there's legislation that could take us further on the conversation?
Go ahead. Yeah, push the button.
Push the button, I'm sorry. Just, you know, if we can get multiple sites at Rikers Island, we say a polling site a lot, and some people have interpreted that as having one polling machine that, you know, incarcerated individuals need to go to. And I'm not just talking about set up in one gym. I'm talking about in all the buildings. So that we need to have an eye on that it's not just one. That gets mentioned a lot, and it was mentioned in a meeting we had yesterday where the individual noted one polling machine wouldn't help. Of course, we want multiple polling machines. But I just want to just put this in the ethos. What the city council could do, it can prioritize New York as being a leader once again in expanding the role of democracy. We live in a great country where America has a great position in the world, and it's being a little distorted now. But within that, New York itself has always led in expanding democracy. And I think it would go a long way of reestablishing that if we say to the world that individuals who are being held in custody have this access to it. So I just want to put that into the atmosphere because I think that can be a guiding force. New York has always led in expanding democracy, and we should make an effort to return to that. I just wanted to say that.
I think also just adding to the poll site, the desire for a poll site at Rikers is requiring some sort of civic education and information on a sustained, ongoing basis at Rikers. So not the presentation that they referenced earlier in their testimony, but something that is geared toward those who are in their care, that is offered monthly or, for some sort of ongoing, regular basis.
I also just wanted to add that until we get a polling site at our city jails, that it would be accommodating if the Voting Jails Coalition leaders were able to take the voting registration forms and the absentee ballots directly to the Board of Elections without the DOC interfering with that process.
And just on that point, as I understand from some of my League of Women Voters colleagues across the state, when they register voters in county jails, they actually are the individuals that deliver them directly to the Board of Elections. It's not the local sheriff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
One question about language. Obviously, not everybody speaks English. So are you able to, do you have enough people who speak different languages? Do you have a language line? Probably not. So how do you handle those who are not proficient in English? Obviously, some are not citizens, but there are many who are. So how do you handle that?
We do have the voter registration and absentee ballot forms in other languages that we take in with us.
So but you don't necessarily have the language of the person, but you definitely have the material in different languages.
We have the materials, and we do have people that speak English and Spanish.
Okay. And then what about these flimsy pens that are a problem because you've got the pen that you sign with?
Thank
and that
you.
doesn't match the signature necessarily. What are you allowed to bring? I'm never allowed to bring in a pen. Are you allowed to bring in a regular pen?
Thank you so very much for raising that. And I really tried to collect some of those pens to bring in with me today, so
I know
you
what they
can
look
see
like.
how much of a hardship it is. And it's actually a ridiculous rule to have when you actually have some people that are detained there who can tell me, hold on a minute, and walk to their bed and go collect their own pen and come back and sign the form. So I really don't see the issue with even giving us those ridiculous pins to have someone use to where their signatures don't match two forms that they're completing at the very same time.
We'll work on the pens.
Thank
Thank you very much, this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now we'll move to public testimony. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, I'm going to say the same thing I said earlier. Fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms. If you are recognized, you'll have 3 minutes to speak at the hearing. Please provide a copy of your statement or additional testimony to the Sergeant at Arms if you have one. If you don't and you want to email it, written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov. within 72 hours of the close of this hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. Yep. Invite Kleiner Lightburn, Dan Cumbernino, Jarrett Berg, Phelan Griffith, and Karen Wharton. Whomever would like to begin, go ahead.
Hey. Right. Thank you. Brooks Powers. Good afternoon, Chairs Brewer and Brooks Powers, the members of the committee. My name is Faraine Griffith, and I am the Chair of Civic Engagement at the New York branch and the NAACP, the first charter branch of the oldest civil rights organization in the country that has championed voting rights since its inception. We, the branch, are a member of the Vote in New York City Jails Coalition. On behalf of the NAACP New York State Conference, we thank you for hosting this hearing and the opportunity to testify today. Although New York State has not taken away the voting rights of those awaiting trial, it sure seems that way. When there isn't a meaningful or permanent way for eligible voters who are incarcerated for non-felony convictions or awaiting trial to exercise their right to vote. We understand as with nursing homes, eligible incarcerated voters would vote via the absentee ballot. However, the absentee ballot voting process is less of a permanent way of voting and less engaging with the voters, with results like 335 voted out of 7,000 in the 2025 election. And that's only due to the work of the Vote in New York City Jails Coalition. Only one name or one person's name can be authorized to pick up to receive absentee ballots on behalf of a voter based on New York's election law. So if a designated person is out on vacation or out sick, voters cannot receive their absentee ballot, which means they can't vote. As of recently, there was a special election in February for 2 districts in Manhattan and 1 in Queens. But no one housed on Rikers Island voted or knew about them, mainly because a designated person now works alongside the commissioner. How are voters to know there's an election if the DOC is in control of voting? In my role at the Public Advocate's Office, I brought in the Board of Election while working at the Public Advocate's Office. I'm so sorry. At the Public Advocate's Office, as a civic and community empowerment organizer, I brought them into the conversation because the DOC kept making excuses about how they received and why they have to go and pick up the ballots, and they call the day before, and we got to pick it up tomorrow, and I know that was not true as a former BOE employee myself. The Board of Elections oversees elections for all voters not housed at Rikers Island, so why wouldn't the BOE oversee oversee elections on Rikers Island. A civilian employee on Rikers Island oversees the voting. An employee who doesn't know or understand election laws, an employee who may not be an avid voter themselves, who may not care if those housed on Rikers even vote. Can I just
go
quickly? Okay. The Vote in Jails Coalition has worked very hard to establish a working relationship with DOC to make sure the eligible voters get to exercise their rights to vote. However, it is the DOC who determines the days the coalition gets to engage with voters. In addition to voting, there is also the voter education, and voters should know which elected offices they are voting for and ballot measures. The coalition's partnership with Campaign Finance NYC Votes makes the little education that is taking place possible. It is the coalition, the DOC that testified today, they made it seem that they have a working relationship with the Board of Election, and they do not. They have a working relationship with the coalition, and I'll save the rest.
Thank you very much. Next. All right, wherever you want to start, go ahead.
Chairs Brooks Powers and Brewer and members of the New York City Council. My name is Jared Berg, co-founder and voting rights counsel at Vote Early New York. I'm here today to highlight the glaring voter access injustice burdening thousands of our fellow citizens detained pre-trial and presumed innocent or serving for misdemeanor offenses who retain their fundamental right to vote, share what I've observed about the slow but steady quest to overhaul and modernize the worst attributes of New York election law, and to urge the New York City Council to pass a resolution calling on Albany lawmakers to enact the Democracy During Detention Act, along with Intros 786 and 797. And for DDDA, it's important that the Council act before lawmakers leave in June. This comprehensive framework has the potential to significantly improve equitable and effective access to the ballot for more than 12,000 New Yorkers in custody who we estimate are eligible to vote, roughly half of whom are held in New York City facilities. The DDDA codifies the right to vote for detained citizens who have not been disenfranchised and requires local election and correction officials to put together a robust, well-resourced voter registration, language access, and balloting program for Rikers and successor facilities ahead of elections. To date, the DDDA proposal, championed by former Senate Elections Chair Myrie and Assembly Election Law Chair Walker, has garnered support from more than 30 local, state, and national voting and civil rights organizations. The bill is backed by 18 Senate sponsors and 33 Assembly sponsors. It's a 2026 priority of the Let New York Vote Coalition, the BIPOC Democracy Table, and is included as a 2026 legislative priority of the Democratic Election Commissioners Caucus at the State Election Commissioners Association, NYSECA. According to the Vera Institute, the snapshot of the jail population of 6,631 persons in custody at Rikers, more than 88% of the population is Black or Latinx, and the vast majority are being held pre-trial. This is not an aberration. The data is frustratingly persistent. For decades, these communities have been disproportionately represented in New York City jails. In addition, because of New York City's incredible language diversity, the absence of a modern voter access program for Rikers perpetuates a significant additional barrier to participation among New Yorkers in DOC custody with limited English proficiency. When enacted, the Democracy During Detention Act will bring language-related assistance in voting, as required by the New York Voting Rights Act, to Rikers, as well as coordination with the Civic Engagement Commission's Pulse Site Language Assistance Program to the extent actually justified by the voters actually in DOC facilities. Additionally, a DDDA-compliant voter access plan must include planning and allocation for assistive devices and reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities, consistent with that provided for voters who are not detained. I know I'm out of time, so I just want to close by asking the Council to call on the state to enact the Democracy During Detention Act, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. Next.
Good afternoon. Dear Chairpersons Brewer, Brooks Powers, and members of the New York City Council of Committees on Governmental Operations, State and Federal Legislation, and Criminal Justice, thank you so much for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Cleanna Lightbourne. I'm the campaign director for the League of Women Voters of New York State, where I lead the work on the Democracy During Detention Act, legislation that would require boards of elections, not correction staff, to take responsibility for voting access in local jails across New York State. Last year, I had the opportunity to visit Rikers Island with the Vote New York City Jails Coalition. Getting in took over an hour and a half. Though I submitted my name previously with my colleagues, my name wasn't in the system, which held us up multiple times. We traded our licenses for yellow cards, carried clear backpacks, and explained our reason for being there more times than I can count. Being driven onto that island via bus, I found myself staring at the sprawling LaGuardia Airport right next door. Planes are lifting off, carrying people home, toward family, toward somewhere they choose to go. Right next to that, close enough to feel the hum of it, were young people whose world had shrunk to the size of a housing unit, where the future keeps leaving without them on it. We went to the juvenile unit that day, split into 2 teams, and spent hours going floor to floor in one building on an island with 9 facilities. Many of these young men had never thought themselves as voters. One realized they still had a voice in what happens to their community, and I could see the spark come back to their eyes. And this is what civic education looks like when it reaches someone for the first time. And it's proof how far we still have to go, because we only reached a fraction of people we needed that day. According to New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, over 6,000 people are held at Rikers Island. According to the Vera Institute of Justice, 86% of people in New York City jails are being held pre-trial, which means they've not been convicted of anything. The vast majority retain the right to vote, and yet according to the Legal Aid Society, which coordinates the Voting in Jails program, fewer than 550 have cast a ballot on Rikers in 2024. That's over 6,000 people and less than 1,000 votes counted in that 9-facility island. 10 years ago, this council passed a local law which required Departments of Correction to run a voting program at Rikers, but corrections were never built to run elections. What Rikers needs and what every jail in this state needs is the Board of Elections at the table. Election professionals with a plan, accountable to the public, showing up before every election. This is exactly what the Democracy During Detention Act would require statewide, and New York must not only defend our democracy, but we must fortify it. That means ensuring every eligible voter can actually cast a ballot no matter where they are, and passing this resolution is how we take that step. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Jan Cavopiano with Brooklyn Voters Alliance. And I'm here to also urge the council to pass a resolution in support of democracy during detention. What we've heard today is the 10 years since the council passed the law tasking the Department of Correction with facilitating voting. It created an obligation, but not a system that works. And what we are all here today is we think every voter matters and every vote counts, even on Rikers. I'm also a poll worker. I have managed a poll site for more than 5 years, and when I hear people talking about absentee ballots as if they're not real, it just really annoys me. And so I want to talk about what a poll site means. An in-person absentee poll site is a real poll site. And what makes it a real poll site is the Board of Elections taking responsibility for voting and election administration. To do that, state-level action is essential. The BOE is a state ministerial agency. Ballot access in all elections, city, state, federal, is governed by state election law. For voting access to be consistent and enforceable across all the jails in New York City, state election law must be amended. We've talked about curing. Curing mostly is about the absentee ballot envelope, whether it's signed, whether it's sealed. But we haven't talked about something that actually happens inside a poll site, and that is, if you mess up your ballot, you get 2 more ballots, right? You can void that ballot and get a new one. But you can't do that with volunteers. You have to do that with trained people who know election law. When folks are going to have a poll site, hopefully at Rikers and or in the borough-based jails, There will be people who need affidavit ballots. Those also are legal documents that need to be filled out correctly, so they require training. So I'm going to use my last 30 seconds and ask for 3 things. 1, please pass this resolution in support of democracy during detention. I'm going to echo what Kai mentioned and mandate civic education. It's not enough to say the Campaign Finance Board puts the voter guide on somebody's tablet. They don't put their voter guide on the tablet. They put the general city voter guide on the tablet. And what we've heard is people need that in-person conversation to help them. And please, please, please be proactive about the borough-based jails. They are being built. I can see the Brooklyn one coming up every day. We need to mandate there will be a poll site at every single one of them. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairs Brooks Powers and Brewer, and members of both committees. My name is Karen Wharton. I'm Legislative Director of Citizen Action of New York and convener of the New York BIPOC Democracy Table, a statewide coalition of Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led organizations at the forefront of democracy reforms. For over 40 years, Citizen Action has organized working people, immigrants, and communities of color across New York State. We fought for rights restoration for formerly incarcerated New Yorkers. We fought for a clean slate. And I sit before you today as a continuation of that work, making sure that every New Yorker who has the legal right to vote can actually cast a ballot. And that is why I urged the New York City Council to pass a resolution in support of the Democracy During Detention Act, the bill number S-440-A2121. This legislation ensures that eligible voters who are detained in local jails have access to the ballot. The Committee of Governmental Operations oversees the Board of Elections and the Voter Assistance Commission and exists to advance state legislation on behalf of the city. The Committee of Criminal Justice oversees the Department of Correction. Together, you have the jurisdiction this bill requires. According to the 2023 report by the Data Collaborative for Justice at John Jay College, just 40 of New York City's 178 zip codes account for 60% of New York City jail admissions. The majority are concentrated in the Bronx and Central and South Brooklyn. These are not random zip codes. As of 2022, Black New Yorkers made up 61% of the city's jail population, while comprising just 22% of the general population. In 92% of New York City zip codes, Black residents are admitted to the city jails at a higher rate than their share of the neighborhood population. And many of you represent the very neighborhoods most impacted, districts that are ground zero for this issue. Tremont and Mauriciana in the Bronx, Bronxville, East New York, and Ocean Hill in Brooklyn. These neighborhoods are among the top 10 zip codes citywide for jail admissions. The communities most harmed by pretrial detention across this state have representation at this table. This is not a coincidence. May I go on? Not too much more. This is not a coincidence. This is an opportunity. And these are not statistics that I just spouted about strangers. They're about us, about our families, our friends, neighbors, people whose names we know. They're your constituents. They're legally innocent and still have the right to vote. And we know that these statistics extend beyond New York City, across the state. Black and Latino communities, already underserved and underrepresented, bear the disproportionate burden of pretrial detention. Every detained eligible voter who misses an election is a tear in their community's civic fabric.
Start to wrap up.
Yes. So democracy during detention fixes a lot of these problems statewide. And so you have the power today to go on record in support of this bill, and I ask you to do so, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have some sense, those of you who are working in Albany, that this bill is going to pass, or has it been on the board for a while, et cetera? Just give us a sense of this. I know we talked about it yesterday at the phone call.
Yeah, I'll start. This bill has only been around for a couple of years, so the fact that it has so much support and support from the election commissioners, it also has money in the budget from the Assembly side. And so there is like a general sense of support. I will leave it to these two to talk about any specifics, but the fact is it's only been 2 years and they're already planning for it to be implemented. That's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Yes, to follow up with that, we're elated to see that there's movement in the Assembly and the Senate. The Assembly, like Jan mentioned, has set aside $500,000 in their budget, and the Senate Elections Committee, where the bill is currently sitting, will actually be convening next week to move that forward. So we are very excited. We have a growing number of co-sponsors, both in the Assembly and the Senate, who are adding to, adding their voices to this need that we are going to the budget with, of saying that this needs to stay in the budget and it needs to pass this year.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. All right.
Well, I do believe your support will really help.
No, we understand. We heard you loud and clear. Thank you.
Well, just in case.
Thank
Want to
you.
make sure.
I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
Thank you, Chair. So if you could just answer, just picking up on your testimony before, how come the Department of Correction has 16 days for voter registration? What's the significance of that number, if any?
That was curious, and I was surprised that no one picked up on it because they kept mentioning 16. It's usually only once a month, but like for 2024, we know that there are 4 elections, right? We had the presidential primary in April, the federal and the state in June, and then the general. The coalition had to be adamant about, hey, we need to get more voter registration days on the calendar because we have these upcoming elections, in addition to the party change February 14th. So I was curious why they kept saying 16, It shouldn't be a set date. It should be what election is taking place. Because in February, we just saw there was an election that took place that no one was able to vote. As you asked the question, Chair Brooks Powers, you asked a question about special elections. They couldn't properly answer that, and we just had a few in February, and we made a big issue about that, the coalition, when we had our monthly meeting, and the Board of Election, as it was already mentioned in testimony, that they haven't been in the meeting since October.
No, thank you for that. And it's clear more work needs to be done around this space and protecting the right to vote for those who are in custody.
And I just want to go on the record that the NAACP State Conference is supporting democracy during detention as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You are fabulous. Thank you so much. These are new ones. The next panel is Amira Wittenberg, Zachary Katzelson, and Barbara Mouton. Whomever would like to begin, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Brooks Powers and Chair Brewer, for holding today's joint hearing about voting on the Rikers Island Jail Complex. My name is Amira Wittenberg, and I attend the Silberman School of Social Work, and I am completing my MSW internship at the Cattell Center for Equity, Health, and Justice. In the first year of my master's program, I interned in the Department of Corrections Programs and Community Partnerships Division on Rikers Island. Part of this included working on the initiative to provide voter registration materials and absentee ballots to people detained on Rikers Island. This program was deeply understaffed and run by one DOC employee and 2 MSW interns. With this limited capacity, we were only able to visit a few units on Rikers at a time, meaning incarcerated individuals were continuously falling through the cracks. When we visited the units, responses were positive, and we engaged in meaningful conversations about civic engagement and the importance of voting. However, the program was dependent on a small number of people to hand-deliver voting materials to approximately 6,000 people at the time, making voting largely inaccessible. Election time proved to be an even bigger challenge as we needed to bring absentee ballots to all the people who have registered to vote. This was simply not feasible. Based on my experience, the current absentee ballot program is failing. In 2024, fewer than 8% of incarcerated people at Rikers Island voted. Over 85% of people incarcerated on Rikers Island have not been convicted, meaning they are eligible to vote, but they are actively denied that right. We're here today with the Vote in NYC Jails Coalition to demand that the Board of Elections address this infringement on the rights of incarcerated people by installing polling sites at all New York City jails moving forward. Creating polling sites will help ensure that incarcerated people can exercise their right to vote. The city must also take action to address the dangerous conditions at Rikers and pass a budget that fulfills its commitment to shutting down Rikers. We urge this council to ensure the voting rights of incarcerated people are protected and use its budgetary power to advance the closure of Rikers. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, Chairs. Good afternoon. I'm Zachary Katz-Nelson with the Independent Rikers Commission. I'm here in that capacity. I'm also here as somebody who's been volunteering in voter registration at Rikers probably since about 2017, including last week, as recently as last week. It feels like this program, we know this, the law obligates DOC to provide anyone who's registered with an absentee ballot, and everyone who's leaving Rikers is supposed to get voter registration materials. Now, I think hopefully Commissioner Richards is starting to change this, right? It's a new day at DOC, and thank God that's the case. He's there. But it feels like he speaks about reentry on day one. I mean, voting is a key part of reentry. It's a key part of what happens while people are incarcerated because people feel valued and valuable. Can't say the word. But that means a tremendous amount because people feel forgotten in Rikers, feel isolated in Rikers. Being engaged means so much, and this is one critical way to do it. So if reentry starts on day one, for instance, why isn't part of the intake process, are you registered to vote? Yeah, if not, would you like to register? Would you need an absentee ballot? That should be a question right straight away. It shouldn't wait until volunteers come in. It makes me think, listening here, and even when I go to the Rikers to do this, it's like George Bush, 1,000 points of light. There's no way for civil society and volunteers to fill in the gap of what government has the scale and the scope to do. That individuals, as hard as this coalition works, to fight to get in 12, 14 days a year at Rikers, it's not possible at all. Last week, we got to 6 housing areas, 6 total, right? And that's one of the 12 or 14 days. That's it. So we, a couple hundred people we had the possibility to talk to, right? It's not possible to reach everyone. And I think about it's not just, by the way, when I think about numbers too, there's 6,700 people or so at Rikers, let's say 5,000 or 6,000 eligible for the vote, but there are 25,000 people that are admitted to Rikers every year, right? So you're talking maybe 20,000 people that could be reached to register to vote at some point during the year. It's a huge scale that one coalition, no matter hardworking of volunteers, is not going to be able to meet. And one thing that came up repeatedly also when there is literacy, that people struggle sometimes with reading and writing. And that's how critical it is for somebody to be there in person to help them, whether a volunteer or a poll worker or whoever it might be, to help them with the process. And I just wanted to also note, we're talking about Rikers, but the law also allows pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds. What would happen about Horizon and Crossroads? To my knowledge, there is not a program there at all to pre-register people to vote while they're there. That's a tremendous opportunity, both for civic education and to register to people to vote, that the city is missing right now. Thank you.
Gosh, thank you both. I have a question for social worker. Love social workers. My question is, can you just be a little bit more specific about what your experience was with the program person, so we understand? You mentioned some of the challenges, but if you could be more specific, because we've heard from the volunteers, but not necessarily from the people assisting the DOC staff.
Yes, definitely. So many of the same challenges that the volunteers were facing, we also faced. It was a challenge to fill out the paperwork to get volunteers in, so that's why we weren't able to bring in volunteers as often as we would like. We also, I mean, I saw challenges in terms of the fact that it was just myself and my supervisor and sometimes one other intern. To be responsible for an entire group of volunteers, we had our DOC IDs, so we were able to go around. Like I was able to take branch off and take a group of volunteers on my own, but still this was like a small group. So we just were really not able to access so many people. We would only end up being able to visit a few units at a time. And then in terms of actually taking the ballots after, I know this was asked, we would try to take the ballots on the same day, but
To the Board of Elections.
yes, but unfortunately, like sometimes this was just not possible. So yeah.
And so from the best of your knowledge, somebody from DOC the next day or the next day or the next day would take them to Queens, to the Board of Elections, but you never really knew when.
Yeah, I did not go, but someone would take them, my supervisor.
Okay, and then what about my technology questions that you heard earlier? There has to be a better way. So I think it's great when you enter, not to mention the juveniles, that's a great idea too. But it seems to me not only you should be asked, but there must be some way to also get your AD or your ED once you have the address. Not everybody has an address, I understand that. And if you're in a shelter, which a lot of people are, you may not go back to the same shelter. So there are some address issues, but how would you suggest, you ask if you're registered. Some people, they don't even know what that is, they're not, et cetera. So give us a little sense of what you think that would look like, and is there some way that technology could play a role? I mean, I call a hotel now, I can't get a human being. You get this AI person who tells you whether you have anything. I mean, this seems to me we could be doing better on the technology front.
100%. I mean, for instance, someone can look up their voter registration status, right? Are you registered? Where are you registered? What address are you registered? Maybe it's somebody registered, but they've moved since then, right? So there are lots of ways that could be looked at. And the fact is that, it's only DOC staff, Correctional Health Services or DOC that has computer access, right? A person incarcerated is not going to be able to look up online to check their status. They need someone from the department to help them. And so I think that would be an opportunity when they're going through the intake. Okay, I will look it up and see where you're registered. And then obviously there has to be some coordination with the programs folks who are then going to be saying, okay, whether it's a special election or otherwise, and that issue about specific information about who's running in your district, right? Especially, for instance, judges, right? How do you learn about that in your area, right? In your borough. And so I think it's really important that we dial down exactly as you're saying, what's your election district, what's your assembly district, but that's easily obtainable if someone takes the time to look.
Thank you both very much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course, thanks so much for this hearing.
We have two people on Zoom, so you can join us. Who's the first one? Bob Leibel and Tammy Reed. So Bob, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Bob Leibel. I'm the Senior Campaign Strategist at the Sentencing Project, a national research and advocacy organization that has worked for 40 years for a fair U.S. criminal legal system. Thank you to the chairs, your staff, committee members, and all of the New York City advocates for this hearing and your important work on this issue. We urge City Council to enact legislation to support robust voting infrastructure, including polling locations at Rikers and future borough-based jails, and to support the statewide Democracy During Detention Act. Simply put, jails should not be democracy dead zones. As we've heard, well over 80% of the people at Rikers are detained pre-trial and do not lose their right to vote. However, jail often acts as a physical barrier to the ballot box. According to the committee report, less than 10% of eligible voters cast their ballots. And because 93% of those at Rikers are people of color, this isn't just an administrative hurdle, it's also a racial justice issue. Disparities in the criminal legal system are leading to disparities in access to democracy. Furthermore, with most incarcerated people held nationwide simply because they can't afford bail, de facto disenfranchisement has become something of a poverty penalty that locks New Yorkers and others out of democracy. However, we know that solutions exist. We have seen that when people are given the means to vote, they do, in fact, vote. In some cities that have enacted jail-based voting locations, often combined with robust civics education programs, turnout at the jail has actually exceeded turnout in the broader community. In Chicago, establishing a jail-based polling site at the Cook County Jail saw a turnout jump from 7% to over 50%, and the highest participation rate in the city. In Colorado, following the passage of SB 24, jail voter turnout surged from 4% in 2020 to 25% in 2024, and this increase was driven by new requirements for in-person voting options and improved coordination between county clerks and sheriffs. In Washington, D.C., 83% of jail-based registrants cast a ballot in 2024, actually outperforming the general public. We've also seen jail-based voting locations take root in California and in several counties in Texas, which is where I'm located. And as was mentioned by an earlier speaker, a colleague of mine produced a report on voting in Maine and Vermont prisons, states that do not disenfranchise people who are serving felony prison time. And while barriers still exist there are many lessons for developing access for incarcerated voters in Rikers and other jails. We've also produced a brief summarizing research that shows that voting helps justice-impacted people maintain a civic identity and stay connected to their communities, and results in better public safety outcomes. So not only is it good for incarcerated New Yorkers, but it's good for all of us to maintain that connection.
Time's expired.
To keep people out of jail. Thank you very much. We really appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. Tammy Weed. Tammy Weed. I think you need to unmute. Okay, Tammy, we can't hear you. Are you still wanting to speak? Tammy, we will accept any material that you send in writing. Unfortunately, there seems to be a technology issue, but we look forward to hearing whatever you have to say in writing. Thank you very much. And without further ado, this hearing concludes, but not the work. The work will be ongoing, and thank you very much for being here. And thank you, my colleague, Selvina Brooks Powers, who's an amazing chair. Thank you.